The world was seriously unfair. At least, that's what Leon thought a young man. Turning 18 the next day, two wooden swords collided with a loud clack, and splinters flew through the air as the blades chipped under the intense clash. The air itself seemed to tear apart. A properly made wooden sword was deadly. Although it couldn't slice flesh like a real blade, it could still break bones and deal destruction on par with a steel club. Even with protective gear, a blow to a vital spot could be fatal. Even so, Leon threw in everything he had down to his last ounce of strength. Nearly 6 feet tall, he brought the wooden sword crashing down with a cry, using all the power in his well-trained muscles. The way the air split with a sharp rip told how powerful that strike was. If it landed squarely on the crown of his opponent's head, it would probably split open the skull. However, that was a futile worry. The wooden sword never reached its target as it was parried away with a crisp crack. A parry was supposed to be a simple deflection, throwing the attack slightly off its trajectory. But the gap in skill of the two individuals was just too wide. Had this been a real duel, and if the parry had been a counterattack, Leon would have been dead on the spot. Realizing that, Leon took 2 steps back, seething with frustration. He shouted, "Lion, are you even taking this seriously? Am I not worth going all out on?" Lion, the boy who had knocked away Leon's sword, smiled softly. "Of course not. You're the only one who still spars with me, you know. Maybe I'm pissed off because you're always toying with me like this. Well, I'd be lying if I said I gave it my earnest effort. But it would be a little too pitiful if I ended it in just a few seconds, don't you think?" Grinding his teeth, Leon charged in again, yelling, "I hate that condescending look on your face." Despite his fierce rush, his balance remained perfect. It was proof of well-honed fundamentals. Even in the heat of anger, his eyes stayed cold and focused. It was the one area where he had an edge over Lion reach. He used it to repeatedly slam down his attacks. In a battle without aura, a swordsman's effective range came down to height and arm length. Leon maintained the narrow advantage he had in that regard as he unleashed his flurry of strikes. But Lion easily blocked each one. As expected, he muttered, grinning all the while, "You've improved a lot since our last spar. For someone who's only learned swordsmanship at the academy, this is really impressive. I heard you practically train from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. Perhaps that's why. You little... Hey, I'm not making fun of you, so don't get mad." "All right, here I come for real," Lion said. His form had distorted even before he could finish the sentence. Leon's eyes couldn't keep up with the sudden burst of speed. His instincts kicked in, and he raised his sword, alert. He managed to block the strike, but only barely. It was more luck than skill. The wooden sword slammed into his side, hammering his blade. His forearm went numb, and he was shoved backward. Was it strength? Or was it technique? While Leon staggered from the impact, Lion didn't miss the opening. With a chilling crack, Leon's wooden sword broke in two. Lion had aimed perfectly at the spot that had been damaged in the first exchange. Leon gasped in disbelief and lunged with what remained of his weapon. But Lion's blade was already at his throat. It was a complete defeat. Leon finally accepted the outcome and lowered his arms. Damn it! He couldn't help but curse. He'd lost again. The broken sword in his hand crumbled under his grip. He had trained desperately, reviewed every past defeat, studied Lion's dueling style, and pushed his body to the brink day and night. And still, he couldn't beat him. Murmurs of other cadets could be heard in the distance. "Wow, that's Lion for you." Leon didn't even stand a chance. He held out longer than most, though. Lion usually ends it in one hit. Maybe it's because they have the same name, just spelled differently. Whatever. "Oh, right, I heard you're doing worse than Charles from Class P. What's up with that?" "Shut up, Tom." Noticing them, Lion waved happily. He was the victor, as always. The scene was picture perfect, completely at odds with Leon's mood. Lion had golden hair that shone like sunlight and piercing blue eyes that drew every gaze. In short, he was nothing less than a prince straight out of a storybook. People joked about them sharing the same name. But Lion was nothing like Leon. He's probably lying about being a commoner too, Leon thought. 3 years ago, when Lion transferred to the Royal Academy, his first impression was anything but ordinary. His looks were striking, even from a man's perspective. His clothes screamed high status. He even had an elderly attendant who looked every bit the loyal butler. It was obvious this guy had some dangerous secret. Get involved, and you'd only get hurt. Then why join the commoners class? He should be training with the other noble scum. Why be an obstacle and get in my way as if it's entertaining? Leon let out a long sigh and stared at the ground. You okay? Lion asked, extending his hand. Seeing that hand made Leon's blood boil. If Lion had been an outright jerk, it would have been easier to hate him. However, for some reason, Lion always treated him kindly. No matter how often he challenged Lion, the latter never frowned, never refused. In a different world, they might have become friends. That is, if not for the voice that called out just then. Lion. The moment he heard that voice, Leon smacked Lion's hand away, saying, "Forget it," and turned his back. He knew it was rude, but staying here was worse. Wait, Leon. Someone stepped in front of him. After just a few steps it was Chloe. Leon narrowed his eyes, squinting like he was staring into bright sunlight. Golden hair like Lion's, blue eyes to match on the outside. She looked every bit the noble lady. She had been by Leon's side since childhood. She was undoubtedly his first love, though he hadn't realized it just yet. Chloe confronted Leon. I heard everything. You picked a fight with Lion again, didn't you? Why do you keep doing this when you know you can't win? Having no idea of Leon's low mood, her words jabbed at his chest like needles, as if he weren't already hurt enough. Leon barely held back the rising wave of inferiority that threatened to swallow him whole. At the very least, he didn't want to look pathetic in front of her. It's none of your business. He forced out the words and closed his eyes, afraid she'd see the envy in them, and moved to walk past her. Leon, your hand's bleeding. Oh, it must have happened when his sword broke. He hadn't even realized it before, and only now he looked down at his left palm after her words. Blood and splinters were matted together in a grotesque mess. No wonder Chloe looked horrified. Give it here, I'll treat it. Let me disinfect it first. I said I'm fine. Leon pulled his hand away coldly and walked past her. Chloe reached out like she wanted to stop him, but before her hand could reach him, he said, "Stop worrying about me." Leaving her frozen behind him, Leon walked away, blood dripping from his hand in a trail. It wasn't something one said to someone worried about them. He hadn't meant to push her away like this. Still, Leon never looked back, even as regret churned inside him. All he wanted was to get somewhere, anywhere, where no one could see him. The taste of defeat, one he'd swallowed dozens, maybe hundreds of times by now, wasn't any less bitter than the last. Having returned to the dormitory, Leon cleaned the wound on his hand. Groaning intermittently, he soaked a cloth in warm water and wiped away the dried blood. A few wood shavings came loose, along with a bit of torn flesh. He had probably gripped the wooden sword very tightly such that the calluses on his palm had been stripped away. He winced at the pain, but it passed quickly. Then, without hesitation, Leon picked out the splinters embedded in his palm one by one. Fortunately, it didn't take long. There, with practiced hands, he applied ointment and wrapped the wound in a bandage. After finishing the treatment, he flexed his left hand a few times to check there was no real trouble moving it. The pain had also subsided quite a bit. It shouldn't take too long to heal, Leon thought as he put the first aid kit away and climbed onto the bed. Normally, this would be the time he did strength training, but with the possibility of the injury reopening, he decided to skip it. Well, if he were being honest, that was just an excuse. There had been plenty of days he'd trained through worse pain than this. I'm tired. Lying on the bed, he stared blankly at the ceiling, blinking slowly. It had been 3 whole years, not just a day or two. That was how long he'd been driving himself relentlessly, all to defeat Lion just once. He would be lying if he told himself the process hadn't been grueling. It had only been possible thanks to sheer stubbornness that pushed him past pain. However, even that iron will was nearing its limit. Leon wondered if he should just give up. No matter how hard he worked, he just couldn't win. He'd kept his eyes closed to that fact, but it was undeniably real. All this time, he had trained from morning until night without wasting a single hour. While other cadets laughed and joked, flirted, searched for new clothes, or cheered over tasty meals, Leon had done nothing but sweat and bleed, swinging that wooden sword. Yet, today he'd lost in just 2 exchanges. It wasn't like Lion had trained harder than he had, either. The thought made Leon laugh under his breath, almost involuntarily. No, deep down, he'd always known. No matter how hard he tried, he would never surpass Lion. The gap between them wasn't something effort alone could overcome. The difference in natural talent, in the mentors in their upbringing, in the swordsmanship they learned, even in whether or not they had family backing them, these were walls far too high and too thick for effort alone to scale. Staring straight at that ceiling again, Leon turned his eyes away. So this was a fight I was never going to win from the start. At some point, as he was immersed in his thoughts, it had started raining outside. The dark clouds that had been gathering earlier had swallowed the sky completely. Now the heavens rumbled and groaned. Even the rumbling thunder seemed to mock him. Leon sat up in his bed and pushed the window halfway open. Rain blasted in with the wind, soaking his hair and running down his face in lukewarm streams. His brown hair, a dull and ordinary color, was darkened even more by the rain, so different from Lion's golden locks. Leon had the most absurd thought. Would things have been different if I'd had blonde hair too? They had the same name. Heck, they even shared the same birthday. And yet, in everything else, they were worlds apart. If they hadn't shared even that much, maybe it wouldn't have been this infuriating. But the world had a cruel sense of humor, placing Lion right in front of Leon. Golden hair, blue eyes, noble blood, and talent with a sword. These were all things that Leon had never been given. It's not fair. Of course, he knew the world wasn't fair. He would be 18 tomorrow. After his coming-of-age ceremony, he'd officially be an adult, the clearest indicator of no longer being a kid. It was time to put aside his pride and accept reality. The rain pounded against the window, drumming in his ears. Staring blankly at the downpour in the courtyard, he found that a sliver of hope still clung to his heart. Just one more day, one more try. Even after all the tears, he still couldn't give up. Let's try one last time tomorrow, he resolved. After wasting 3 years, what's one more day? Leon thought those words as if comforting himself. He returned to his bed and closed his eyes. Once he shut his eyes and opened them again, tomorrow would come. A birthday 1 year ahead of Lion's, yet no one would celebrate. A day when he would have to admit the last 3 years of effort had been meaningless. Perhaps because of that rather depressing thought, Leon tossed and turned for a long time, before finally falling asleep unlike usual. That night, Leon dreamed of a story he had heard when he was a child. It was an old tale his mother told while he was curled up in her arms by the fireplace. But it was so long ago that he could not remember exactly when. The rather cliché story followed a protagonist who was raised without knowledge of their birth family. Chosen by prophecy, they came to wield a goddess-bestowed sword and embarked on a journey to vanquish evil. Along the way, they rescued a kidnapped princess, overcame ancient dungeons with loyal companions, and amassed a mountain of small but noble deeds. In the end, they reclaimed their true identity and defeated the wicked king, delivering a happy ending that everyone had hoped for. The young Leon said, "Mom, I have a question." For some reason, even at that young age, he couldn't simply accept the story as it was. Why was the protagonist the only one who could defeat the evil king? Weren't there other righteous knights or wizards? Why did the goddess give the sword to the protagonist alone? These questions were somewhat appropriate for a child his age to ask, but the last one came as a surprise. Was it because the protagonist was a member of the royal family, not a commoner? Leon's mother was startled by such an unusual question from someone so young. After a moment of contemplation, she smiled wryly and answered, "Some things are just determined from the start." Leon hadn't found that answer satisfying either, but he didn't press further because his mother looked uncomfortable, and he didn't want to trouble her. When he buried the question in his heart and fell asleep in his mother's warm embrace, he never expected it to return to him over a decade later. Leon muttered, "How long has it been since then?" He covered his face with his hands from the strange embarrassment of his childhood memory, which had been tucked away for a long time. What kind of a kid asks questions like that after hearing a fairy tale? Even to himself, he seemed like a pretty difficult child. Groaning over his childhood cringe for a brief moment, he sat up and looked outside. Wow, I guess I slept in. Judging by the sun high overhead, it was well past noon. He couldn't even remember the last time he had slept in this late. Leon's daily routine always started before sunrise. He would run laps in the misty training ground, loosen up, swing his wooden sword until he was drenched in sweat, and watch the sun rise on the horizon. Maybe it was the laziness after so many years of relentless diligence that made him feel strangely guilty now. Peering out the window, Leon finally remembered. Oh, was today a day off? Holidays were rare at the academy, which prided itself on diligence and discipline. Yet, they hardly meant anything to Leon, who seldom left campus except for the occasional trip to town to buy medicine. Other cadets, however, seemed excited by the rare break. The grounds were much more crowded than usual, making it nearly impossible to find a quiet place to concentrate. Leon quickly decided to find a calmer place and began packing, only to realize there wasn't much to pack anyway. All he could think of was a change of clothes, a towel, 2 wooden swords, and a water skin. Slinging the small bag over his shoulder, he left the dorm. Most cadets seemed to be heading toward the main gate, so he didn't run into anyone on his way up the mountain behind the academy. It wasn't a popular walking path, thanks to the rough terrain. Realistically, he was probably the only one who would think of coming here on a rare day off like this. Before long, Leon arrived at a clearing halfway up the slope. Panting softly, "I guess today's the last time I'll come here." The spacious clearing was a random discovery he had made back when he used to run up and down the mountain for endurance training. Since then, whenever he had trouble focusing, he came here to train. How many times had he run here, thrown up out of overexertion, gathered himself, and then swung his sword? The marks left in the dirt stirred old memories. The worn-down ground, pressed flat by his footsteps, was proof of the relentless effort he had put in. "Last day. I have to give it my all," Leon muttered as if to steady himself. He knew that there was no point in clinging to an impossible goal. His heart was burdened by that harsh reality, yet he resolved to keep the promise he made to himself to try. Just until today, gripping a wooden sword, Leon stepped into the center of the clearing. The skin of his left palm hadn't fully healed yet, and it stung, but that pain was perfect for taking his mind off any lingering hesitation. With a sharp gust of wind, the wooden sword sliced through the air in a flawless downward strike. The Academy's swordsmanship was, at its core, merely an application of fundamentals, never offering its cadets an opportunity to learn anything beyond that. Under such conditions, Leon had focused everything on honing his basics to perfection. He would keep slicing through the air, 1,000 times and over, until every last trace of regret in his heart was gone. That night, a small party was underway in the Royal Academy's dormitory hall. The guest of honor was Lion, celebrating his 17th birthday. Even cadets who would normally be fast asleep by now were busy eating and chatting. Though Lion was in the class designated for commoners, his origins were unclear. That, on top of his skills and graceful attitude, led even the noble cadets to gather round him in droves. Their intentions were obvious to anyone, to remain on his good side just in case. He turned out to be of high class. The nobles approached Lion and greeted him one by one. "Happy birthday, Lion. Let's keep getting along. You're the pride of the Academy. It's not much, but I hope you'll accept it." They came in all types. Some clung to him like they were close friends, others flattered him openly, and a few offered gifts as though they were making an investment. Lion received them all with the same gentle smile as always. He eventually lost track of how many meaningless conversations he was repeating. It wasn't until the night was deep and quiet that Lion finally dismissed the guests and made his way to a quiet corner of the hall, where Gilbert was enjoying a drink. Gilbert had served as his attendant since before entering the academy. As soon as Lion sat down beside him, Gilbert immediately flicked his fingers to cast a transparent sound barrier around them. What looked like magic was actually an application of aura, a skill that allowed one to control the sound entering and leaving the barrier at will. Only warriors of considerable skill could use it. But Lion, well aware of Gilbert's true identity, wasn't surprised in the slightest. Looking calmly into his master's face, Gilbert spoke with reverence. "Congratulations on your 17th birthday, Your Highness." It was a shocking statement, to say the least. What could he possibly have meant by Your Highness? Anyone else hearing it would have questioned their own ears. But Lion only let out a long sigh and shook his head slightly. "Please, Sir Gilbert, I'm not worthy of being called that right now. Your Highness, noble blood shines brighter through trial." Gilbert responded with a content smile. "There is but a year until the day foretold in the imperial prophecy, when Your Highness comes of age. Our empire shall witness the return of the Holy King Roderick." "The Holy King Roderick. You're placing a lot of weight on that expectation, Sir Gilbert." Lion trailed off. Holy King Roderick was a legendary hero from over 300 years ago. His accomplishments ranked among the top 3 in human history, with slaying the Demon King with the holy sword granted by the goddess just one part of his legacy. Despite that outstanding feat, there was no hesitation in Gilbert's eyes. He added, "Ho ho, this old man has absolute faith in Your Highness's potential. Even the ruthless usurper fears you will fulfill the prophecy. Does he not? Take heart. I guess we'll know by next year," Lion said before closing his eyes for a moment, recalling the prophecy. "The day the lion-named youth comes of age, the sword to destroy evil shall descend from the heavens." Lion was a member of the imperial family of the Clyde Empire. He was forced to flee to the academy and disguise his identity with layers of deception. Because of this same prophecy. If not for the prophecy, the current emperor who had claimed the throne as a collateral branch would never have attempted to have him killed in the first place. Lion was the only minor in the entire imperial family who was born with a name meaning lion. Upon reading the prophecy, the emperor had immediately sought to eliminate him. How much had he lost crossing the border to hide in this academy? For the sake of those sacrifices, Lion had no choice but to become a hero. It was at that moment that someone called out to him, "Lion." It was Chloe. Her voice pulled him out of his dark thoughts. The anger that had started to resurface with those somber memories vanished, and Lion turned with his usual cheerful smile. "Chloe, something wrong?" he asked. "No, nothing's wrong." But Chloe glanced around before finally continuing, "You haven't seen Leon, have you?" "Nope. They said no one saw him at the dorms either. I thought maybe he came to the party. Where could he have gone?" She sighed in resignation and turned to leave, likely planning to search again. Watching her walk away, Gilbert spoke in a teasing tone. "Oh dear, it seems your highness has been bested." "Save the jokes," Lion said, chuckling and picking up the glass on the table. "Sir Gilbert, what do you think of those two?" "You mean Chloe and Leon?" Gilbert understood the question instantly, despite its vagueness. He answered, "Chloe is quite gifted. She's already learning 4th-tier magic. By next year, she'll be more than capable on her own." "And Leon?" Lion asked. "He's in an awkward spot." The old knight's voice carried a hint of regret. "His build is decent, and his talent with the sword is average at best. However, his determination and mentality are exceptional. If he were given proper swordsmanship training, cultivation techniques, and elixirs, he could very well have a breakthrough. Do you think we can win him over?" "It will be hard." Gilbert's answer was blunt and unwavering. "Your Highness, he doesn't see you as someone to serve. He has never shown hostility. But once you reclaim your identity, it'll be impossible to maintain your current relationship. That's why you never taught him the sword," Lion remarked. "That's right," Gilbert answered briefly. Lion looked out the window with a slightly wistful expression. He had crossed swords with Leon for 3 years and had seen his potential. Leon wasn't someone who would shine in the short term, but rather someone who, with time and care, could become a valuable asset. However, knowing the reason behind Leon's dedication to training made it hard for Lion to push his own agenda on him. Lion said, "See, that's the real shame. If Chloe were an ordinary girl, it'd be one thing, but it's too much of a loss to give up on Leon just for her." "I feel the same." The two exchanged bitter smiles. Being no fools, they knew why Leon kept his distance and why he burned to beat Lion. If it were just a matter of gain and loss, they could always negotiate a solution. But when feelings entered the picture, no amount of logic mattered. Even so, Lion wanted to win both of them over. He knew Leon was a prideful individual and had a strong sense of responsibility for his words and actions. He thought that perhaps he could use these morals to have Leon make a promise to him. Had he grown attached to Leon over the past 3 years? Lion wanted to take them both with him, if possible. He liked Leon in a way different from how he liked Chloe. Leon was the first person who had ever clashed with him without holding back, without pretense. Perhaps he thought of him as a friend, something he had never had as a royal. A femme? While gazing out the window, Lion blinked and rubbed his eyes. Noticing this, Gilbert asked with a curious look, "What is it, Your Highness?" "No, I thought I saw something, but it must have been my imagination." Lion brushed it off, unable to explain what he'd just seen. If he told the truth, Gilbert would only make a big deal out of it. It had happened in a literal blink of an eye. The night sky had suddenly turned gold. Then he blinked again, and everything was back to normal. It was the kind of thing that made one wonder if their eyes had just played tricks on them. So Lion dismissed it and moved on, unaware that this was the very moment in which his fate was altered. The only sound in the empty clearing was Leon's wooden sword slicing through the air, in a simple trajectory. There was nothing flashy or ornate about it. Vertical strikes, horizontal cuts, diagonal slashes, thrusts up to down, down to up, left to right to left. They were all basic movements that made up the foundation of swordsmanship. The Academy's curriculum merely combined these basic moves, or at best, added slight variations. Secret sword techniques containing profound mastery were never permitted to commoners. That was why Leon's training had always been an endless repetition of the basics. From the moment he arrived at the clearing, he had swung his sword nearly 1,000 times without wavering. The wooden sword cleaved through the air with the same speed, power, and precision as when he started. His mastery of the fundamentals was already at its peak. Repetitive training like this could seem meaningless to others, but at some point, Leon had begun focusing not on his body or technique, but on tempering his spirit. It was a different kind of strength than aura, and it had become the source of hope that he might one day defeat Lion. That strength, though invisible, was definitely real. He swung the sword yet again, but this time, there was barely any sound, unlike the earlier swings. He had finally done it. He had cut through the air without disturbing its natural flow, and with a blunt wooden sword at that. That wasn't something that could be accomplished with physical sword skill alone. With that final swing, Leon wiped away the sweat and thought, so that's it, then. It wasn't until two towels were soaked through that his body began to cool down. The cold mountain breeze dried his damp hair, and now that he had stopped swinging the sword, he could hear birdsong tickling his ears. Leon dropped to the ground, caught between satisfaction and longing. Curfew had surely passed by now, but tonight he couldn't care less about the penalty. He wanted to stay in this moment a little longer. He let out a deep sigh as his chest tightened with emotion. Even after 1,000 swings, he hadn't freed himself from all his regrets. Well, how could he? After years of effort, how could a single day be enough to let go of everything he had worked for? How many layers of calluses had he shed? How many wooden swords had he broken? No one at the academy had trained more than him. No one had broken more practiced swords than him. Struggling to lift his head above the creeping despair, Leon asked himself, but why do I have to give up? He knew the answer to his own question. There was no reward waiting at the end of his hard journey. Some people said hard work was beautiful in and of itself, but that was either a loser's excuse, or the naive ramblings of someone who had never tasted real failure. Others would say that aside from a rare few, most people never achieve their dreams. Most settle for something less, and that he was no different. Leon agreed with that sentiment, but he also had something of his own to say. If everything is decided from the start, then what's the point of trying? If there was a possibility of success, failing was fine. It could be seen as part of life, and it might even have its own value. Some may laugh and say it was a foolish challenge, while others may hold regret and say, if only I had tried a little harder. But what if there wasn't even a chance to begin with? If someone's success or failure was determined from the very start, could there be any meaning to that life? Wasn't that the same as playing some meaningless game of chance? Leon had never prayed before, not once. But tonight, he quietly called out to the nameless goddess. Oh, goddess. She was said to have nurtured the world since the beginning, never demanding worship, and quietly watching over the free lives of her creations. For the first time, Leon spoke to that great being. Was my life meaningless? Of course, the goddess did not respond. The night sky, filled with 1,000 stars, remained silent as always, or so he thought. Too soon, out of nowhere, a blinding light exploded above Leon's head as he stared into the sky in a daze. Ho! He instinctively flinched back. The sudden brightness blinded him completely, but that was far from his biggest problem. The academy didn't just teach swordsmanship. Subjects like classical history, etiquette, and even natural sciences were part of the curriculum. Thanks to the astronomy lessons, Leon knew exactly what he was looking at. It was a meteor, a shard of a star, a celestial disaster that fell from an unreachable sky at unimaginable speed, accompanied by massive heat and shockwaves. Even a small one could level a city wall in a single strike. Leon hurled himself to the ground, internally pleading for his safety, clenching his eyes shut. He braced for the blast and prayed he would survive. Seconds passed, but the impact never came. Only time moved forward. Then, an unfamiliar and firm voice echoed in Leon's mind. Stand up. Who's there? Leon shouted. If you're so curious, then why don't you get up and see for yourself? Startled by the blunt response, Leon blinked. His eyes were still hazy from the flash. Rubbing his eyes a few times, he squinted into the dark and cautiously muttered, I still can't see. Oh, hang on a second. Then, Leon felt a cool sensation wash over his eyes as his blurry vision cleared up completely in an instant. But what he saw next made him question his own sanity. Is that a sword? His jaw dropped open. Just a few steps ahead of him stood a sword, upright, shining brilliantly. Its hilt and cross guard stretched out to the sides and above, while the blade beneath them flowed like molten iron. From the center of the blade blazed a golden sun, radiating light that seemed to burn away the mountain's darkness. Even someone without faith would feel a sense of awe just looking at it. According to what Leon had learned during his years at the academy, There was only one sword in the world like that. The Holy Sword, Leon exclaimed. The Holy Sword scattered light in all directions as it answered in a booming voice. That's right. And you're the one who called me, Leon. Me? I called the Holy Sword? Yes, your heart summoned me. The world is unfair. Those who have, take more. Those who don't, lose even the little they had. But at the very least, opportunity must be given equally. The Holy Sword alone stood tall on the mountain, its voice full of majesty as it continued. You, who spoke of life's unfairness to the goddess, I ask you now. Those who make no effort have no right to blame life's injustice. Only those who burn their lives to the fullest earn that right. Leon, do you believe you are worthy of it? The energy radiating from the Holy Sword was overwhelming. Despite the sweat on his brow, Leon lifted his head to look at it. It was like standing before a dragon from legend. Leon's bones and muscles froze, unable to move. The gaze of the Supreme Being, one that allowed not even a speck of falsehood, was locked onto him. And yet, Leon managed to speak. Even though he had unknowingly stopped breathing, his soul gave voice to his answer. I do. The strength he had forged each day in his heart became his voice. I am worthy. Once again, the light scattered in all directions. Then I shall grant you the chance to prove it. When the dazzling brilliance faded, what remained was a single, beautiful sword, embedded in stone, waiting to be drawn. Take hold of me. The Holy Sword urged, still radiating its awe-inspiring pressure. The force was so intense that most would struggle to take a single step forward. Still, it wasn't just the physical strain. What weighed most heavily was the resolve it demanded. Knowing what it meant to grasp that sword, Leon opened his eyes wide. Why was this resolve so hard for him to justify? Was the symbol of the Holy Sword so above him that he had to feel guilty about taking it? The moment he took a step forward and grunted in response to the overwhelming presence, the Holy Sword warned him coldly. Do not think that obtaining me will grant you instant power. The trials you will face will be far greater than the opportunity I offer. When he took the second step, its voice softened slightly. This burden is not yours alone to bear. Those destined for greatness must endure a harsher path than others, and that might affect the ones you care about. You may lose the woman you love or the friends you trust. Must you really walk a road lined with such thorns to obtain this special life? With the third step, the sword whispered temptingly, if you simply want to defeat that noble boy, Lion, I can lend you a bit of power just for a little bit to help you do just that. Pass the duties of a Holy Sword's master onto someone else while still fulfilling your wish. After all, bearing the responsibility of saving the world simply because you wanted to go against your fate, it hardly seems like a fair deal, does it? With one final step remaining, Leon stopped and took a deep breath. Every word from the sword shook him to his core, a trial so severe that even the Holy Sword itself warned him. A sacrifice so big he had never once considered it until now. And finally, victory, the very thing he had desperately longed for over the past 3 years. Even in his dreams, if he stopped here, he would lose nothing while only gaining everything he ever wanted, enjoying the thrill of triumph by crushing Lion's unfair power with one decisive blow. But, Leon said as he took one more step, that would be cowardly. He had trained every single day to shatter that cage created by injustice, because he refused to accept a world where outcomes and rankings were decided regardless of effort. If he compromised here, if he made a deal with the sword, then all the resolve and training of the past would be meaningless, worthless as trash. His life may have been steeped in defeat and inferiority, but it wasn't without value. Leon had stepped before the Holy Sword to prove that very meaning. After he completed the fourth and final step, the Holy Sword raised its voice in praise. You are right. You have proven the nobility of your soul, O warrior. The light that had faded from the Holy Sword returned, flaring with radiant fire. The sun engraved on its blade burned brightly as if rejoicing at the arrival of its rightful master. That was the will of the sword itself. A warrior was not chosen by prophecy, nor were they chosen by noble blood or lineage. A warrior was chosen for their heart that did not falter before unfair fate, and their will that sought not gold or glory, but to prove their own convictions. Only someone with all of that deserved to be a true hero. Now, draw me. Guided by the Holy Sword's fervor, Leon reached into the heart of the blazing light and gripped the hilt. Immediately, a surge of vitality flooded in and flowed through his exhausted body, and courage filled his chest. He felt like he could overcome any trial that lay ahead. Already fired up, the Holy Sword shouted in triumph. I am El Cid, the incarnation of Holy King Rodrigo Caldeas el Viver, and the blade that shall lead this era into light. Leon, my master, let us strike down evil together." It was a beginning humble enough that some might call it pathetic. A holy sword and a commoner hero meeting in a backwoods clearing behind the academy wasn't exactly a tale that would sell well. However, that very framework was the enemy Leon was destined to break. The moment he grasped El Cid, a storm began to brew in his life. And that storm was powerful enough to make something like birthright seem irrelevant. A brash voice echoed through an unknown space. "What did you call me for?" Gone was the grand tone that had just finished praising Leon. El Cid had returned to its usual cocky voice, but there was no problem with that. After all, El Cid was the spiritual avatar of Holy King Roderick himself. Naturally, its personality didn't differ much from the man it came from. In other words, this loud, irreverent tone was the real Holy King Roderick, an inconvenient truth buried beneath generations of glorified history. His greatness had overshadowed his less-than-ideal personality. "What do you mean? I broke the prophecy. What are you talking about? Leon's name does mean lion, doesn't it? Just because it's a Clyde prophecy doesn't mean it's only about royalty, right? Come on." Whoever El Cid was arguing with, he handled their criticism with practiced deflection and shameless ease. The truth was simple. Leon was never supposed to be the chosen hero. That lion kid, he didn't make the cut. Had the talent, had the right fate, but couldn't awaken the will. He's a bust. El Cid spoke like he was evaluating a spoiled potato. "Still, I gotta say, I expected a lot more nagging from you. Guess you like Leon too, huh? Can't blame you, he's a rare kind of guy these days. In a world where the upper crust has everything locked down tight, kids like him are almost extinct. In my time, maybe 3 like him, tops." On and on El Cid rambled. He muttered, complained, rebutted, and laughed, having a full-on conversation with someone. Even if their voice was never heard, there was only one being in all of existence capable of speaking with the Holy Sword and transcending time and space. Toward the end, the conversation grew more serious. El Cid's tone lost all trace of its usual mirth. "Hey, stop worrying so much, all right? If he uses my legacy properly, he'll outshine every past hero. It's about time those bastards repaid their debt anyway." In that unknowable place, El Cid's light began to fade as the conversation came to an end. "Then watch him closely from up there. That's your job, isn't it?" With those final words, the Holy Sword's light returned to the earth, to the side of a humble commoner who happened to be the first to be acknowledged as a warrior in 300 years. The morning after his 18th birthday, Leon woke up at 5 a.m., as he always did, and neatly made his bed. By now, these actions had become routine, something his body had learned through years of countless repetitions. Of course, he was still sleepy. He wasn't a machine, after all. After splashing cold water on his face a few times, he finally pried his eyes fully open and caught his reflection in the mirror, a face with brown hair and dark brown eyes. He wasn't particularly ugly, but he wasn't exactly handsome either. He brushed his bangs back with his left hand, which bore a faint glowing mark on the back. A new, yet now familiar voice spoke. "You up?" "Good morning, El Cid," Leon replied, greeting the sword with casual familiarity. He had grown surprisingly accustomed to this interaction in just a single night. The Holy Sword. El Cid was the same legendary sword said to have been bestowed by the goddess to Holy King Roderick himself. If the church caught wind of its existence, the Pope would probably come running barefoot. Yet, despite the weapon's grand title, El Cid's personality was surprisingly easygoing. That dramatic first meeting must have just been for show. "El Cid, are you awake even when I'm asleep?" Leon asked, voicing a sudden curiosity. "I can sleep if I want or stay awake if I want. It's not like I can actually do anything while you're knocked out, though, so you could be my night watch if you wanted." "How insolent." Leon chuckled at the immediate outrage and started changing clothes. It struck him then just how long it had been since he had laughed like this. His every day consisted of nothing but training, and then some more training. Leon had chosen to isolate himself. He didn't have anyone he could truly call a friend. Chloe had approached him occasionally, but he kept his distance. He didn't want any rumors swirling around about him getting close to a girl who was involved with Lion. Talking to someone first thing in the morning and bantering over silly, insignificant things was oddly refreshing, but it wasn't bad at all. "Oh, right," Leon said suddenly. "You said you wanted to see how I handle a sword, didn't you? Ida, if I'm to teach you, first, I need to see where you're at." "You're probably gonna be disappointed," Leon muttered, but immediately winced at his own accidental slip. "El Cid, however, replied without a hint of mockery, "I won't be disappointed. Leon, you did your best with what you were given. What kind of teacher blames a student for not learning what they were never taught?" This was an unexpected reply. Feeling a blush creeping in and his eyes watering slightly, Leon quickened his pace. The bond between a holy sword and its wielder wasn't physical, it was forged through the heart. And El Cid's sincerity hit Leon like a hammer to the chest. To have someone believe in you, how powerful that was. He clenched his wooden sword tighter without even realizing it. By the time they reached the training grounds, El Cid was casually surveying the surroundings. "I guess the sun's not up yet. It's pretty dark." Leon couldn't exactly tell how a sword embedded in the back of his hand was seeing the world, but whatever it was doing, it definitely seemed to be very thorough, almost as if it had no blind spots that most creatures would have. Leon limbered up quickly, then gripped his wooden sword and said, "Well then, let's get started." There wasn't much to show. His swordsmanship amounted to basic movements, slightly modified at best. Leon thought that he didn't possess anything worthy of showing a legendary sword that carried the memories of a great hero. But El Cid's earlier words pushed him forward. With that support, he concentrated harder than ever. The wooden blade sliced through the air with a clear sound, like the wind being sliced without disrupting the airflow. It was a perfect strike that he could only pull off once every 100 swings at best. But today, something was different. Leon, fully immersed in the sword, moved without hesitation. From a downward slash straight into an upward cut, then into a diagonal swing. He repeated the movements again and again, seamlessly, not just once by chance, but over and over again, 10 times, 20 times. He moved without pause, without error, until finally, he heard El Cid's voice. "Stop." Leon reluctantly halted at the command, but then soon realized why he was told to do so. The wooden sword in his hand was riddled with fine fractures, about to shatter into pieces. Even though he had only been swinging it through empty air, one couldn't mimic the same cracks even with a hammer. Leon stared, wide-eyed, while El Cid remained calm. Though, in a way, even he was impressed. "You weren't even aware you were using it, huh?" "Sure, practicing the fundamentals is supposed to be good for developing it, but I didn't know someone could pull it off without even using aura." "What exactly happened?" Leon asked. "Don't worry about it for now. If you start relying on it too early, it'll only stunt your growth. I'll explain when the time's right." Leon badly wanted to know more about this new power, but he suppressed his curiosity. If the Holy King himself said to wait, then waiting was what he would do. Even if Roderick told him to train with a broomstick instead of a spear, Leon would have listened to him. Picking up on his accepting attitude, El Cid chuckled dryly and continued his evaluation. "You've done a fine job polishing your basics. Nothing major to point out there. We just need to teach you how to actually control your body." "Control my body? Not sword techniques?" Leon asked, surprised by the unexpected shift in the lesson. "What? You don't need your arms to swing a sword? Body control is the foundation of martial arts. You've clearly built up your muscles through training, but that's not exactly the same thing." After his brief explanation, El Cid thought for a moment before giving Leon a new instruction. He had seen enough of Leon's technique. Now it was time to test his physical capabilities. "Start running." "Run? For how long?" "Until I tell you to stop. Oh, and be ready to follow random commands while you're running. Stuff like handstands or hopping on one foot." Leon, who had been confidently tossing off his jacket, froze. Running wasn't a problem, but hopping on one foot? Doing handstands while circling the training field? That, he hadn't exactly practiced. Even so, Leon took a few quick breaths and took off, his face slightly more tense than usual. He ran across the familiar dirt field, trusting his feet more than his eyes, bracing himself for whatever bizarre command El Cid would throw at him. And as he ran the laps, the sun began to rise over the distant hills. It was a view he was quite familiar with. The middle-aged man standing at the front of the classroom read from the textbook in a low voice. "That's why soldiers in the north alternate between two types of armor. Metal armor does offer excellent protection, but it can't withstand the brutal cold when even water skins freeze solid. Likewise, soldiers stationed in the desert, where the heat is relentless, often wear armor made of cloth or leather. This is an example of how environmental factors can limit the functionality of armor itself." Classes at the Royal Academy were almost evenly split between practical and theoretical lessons. Moving one's body all day was inefficient, so after training in swordsmanship and physical fitness, cadets were taught a variety of subjects, like humanities, natural sciences, and military strategy. Because of the broad scope of the curriculum, the cadets inevitably lacked depth to their acquired knowledge. However, even superficial understanding created a huge gap compared to knowing nothing at all. After all, simply having strength didn't make a knight valuable. Modern knights needed to be capable of serving as field commanders when necessary, with the judgment to handle a wide variety of situations immediately. Unless one was exceptionally talented in martial prowess, strength alone wasn't enough anymore. God, I'm tired, Leon thought as he mechanically took notes, fighting to keep his heavy eyelids open. He wasn't exactly a model student, but he wasn't the type to doze off during class, either. He must have been truly exhausted. El Cid had truly pushed him to his limits. He had repeated some seemingly pointless movements hundreds of times, until he was on the verge of throwing up. The result of that brutal training came down to El Cid's simple evaluation of Leon. You're a perfectly made blank canvas, a real treat to paint on. There was an old saying from the East, great vessels take time to complete. But Leon's vessel was already built. It only needed to be filled. El Cid was the holy sword carrying the memories of Holy King Roderick. It had more than enough to pour into Leon. If it passed down even a portion of the ancient hero's swordsmanship and cultivation methods, Leon would easily reach the level of a swordmaster. Though that wasn't enough for El Cid. No way I'm letting my first successor in 300 years stop at swordmaster. Let's see. You need to be able to swat down dragons like flies. As for the demon king of this era, I don't actually know how strong they are, but half my strength ought to be enough to take him out, he had said. The goddess who had been quietly watching from the heavens nearly fainted at his words, but El Cid, oblivious to her horror, made up his mind. He would forge Leon into a warrior who could stand at least halfway alongside him. From the warrior's perspective, it was the moment the gates of hell swung open and he didn't even realize it. Leon, at El Cid's call. Leon pinched his thigh under the desk as he internally answered, I'm listening. He had to stay focused, not missing a single word of El Cid's lesson. Satisfied at his attitude, El Cid continued his lesson. Good. I think I know where to begin our lesson. Leon, what do you think is your biggest weakness? My swordsmanship or maybe aura? El Cid shot him down instantly. Wrong. It's your eyes. My eyes. Exactly. There's a saying, I don't know where it originated, but it goes, first comes insight, footwork comes second, courage third, and strength comes last. Insight is the most important, then footwork, then courage, strength is last. Leon fell silent, pondering the words in his mind, so El Cid elaborated. Of course, strength matters too, but it means there are 3 things that are even more important. I don't agree with everything about it, but it does show just how vital your eyes are. Eyes? Leon already knew vision was important. But how did one train their eyes? Simply rolling his eyes around wouldn't improve dynamic vision. Sensing his confusion, El Cid spoke again. Leon, from now on, you're going to learn how to see. You're going to understand just how useless your eyes have been until now. He paused to let the words sink in, then gave his first command. Focus straight ahead. Look at the teacher standing in front of the chalkboard. Focus on him for 10 seconds and remember everything. All right. Leon widened his eyes and stared at the deep green chalkboard and the middle-aged man, standing in front of it. Brown hair, green eyes, chalk dust clinging to his fingers, a red necktie, a sprinkling of gray in his mustache, brass cufflinks shining a pale gold on his sleeves. 10 seconds passed. Now close your eyes and tell me, how many lines of text were written on the chalkboard? What? Leon panicked at the unexpected question. Wait, you told me to look at the teacher. I told you to focus, didn't I? Who said anything about focusing only on him? You've got to be kidding me. He tried to recall the scene just now, but nothing came to mind. He could picture the teacher's shirt buttons clear as day, but he had no memory of what was written on the chalkboard. El Cid chuckled knowingly. Nothing, right? You must have seen the board with your own eyes, but you can't recall a thing. Why do you think that is, even after focusing so hard for 10 seconds? I don't know. It's simple. You only tried to look at what you needed to see. The eyes were wasteful organs, far more than people realized. Humans had about 180 degrees of horizontal vision, 120 vertically. If they moved their eyes, the field expanded even more. Yet, hardly anyone actually used the full breadth of their vision. Maybe to filter out unnecessary information. Most people didn't even remember what was at the edges of their sight. What had just happened to Leon was completely normal. Focus on your entire field of view. Memorize everything your eyes taken, like painting a picture. Relax your gaze and learn to see broadly. One day, you'll need to do it constantly, not just for 10 seconds. Leon fought the urge to say that was impossible. Deciding something was impossible only made it harder. He had never expected the Holy Sword's training to be easy. Besides, hadn't El Cid warned him from the beginning that gaining the sword didn't grant him instant strength, and that the trials ahead would be far harsher than the opportunity itself? I can't start whining already. Gritting his teeth, Leon forced himself to focus. Changing habits formed over 18 years couldn't happen overnight. But mindset could be corrected immediately. Seeing that manifest in Leon, El Cid smiled inwardly, though he remained stern. This time, look at the top of the chalkboard. Same deal. Focus for 10 seconds. Got it. Fired up, Leon glared forward with renewed determination. This was noticed by someone 3 seats over. Lion tilted his head, glancing sideways at Leon, wondering what he was doing. For some reason, his eyes were drawn to the back of Leon's left hand where a sun-shaped golden mark shimmered, faintly, but unmistakably. However, it was invisible to someone not recognized by it. In the end, Lion never figured out what that strange feeling was, even by the time class ended. Now, tell me, what color was the crest on the third helmet from the left? Leon, unsure of the answer, thought without an ounce of confidence. Blue. Wrong. That was the second helmet. The training El Cid had begun teaching Leon how to see was far more difficult and exhausting than he had imagined. Less than a day in, and it felt like his eyeballs were going to fall out. In hindsight, maybe it was to be expected. To put a number to it, if his eyesight up to now had been functioning at a 3, then El Cid was demanding something well beyond a 10. Of course, his overworked eyes and brain would throb. Even all-nighters didn't give him this bad of a headache. At least resting his eyes helped a little. However, the headache refused to fade. It just kept pulsing behind his skull. Despite Leon's suffering, for some reason, it seemed like El Cid was only more pleased the worse he looked. Ha, that's good. That means it's working. Leon, hearing that, briefly wondered if El Cid was really a holy sword or a cursed one. However, the explanation that followed did make sense. Eye strain just means your eyeballs are dry or over-tensed. But headaches? That's different. It means you're waking up abilities you've never used before. It's no different from sore muscles. So, it's kinda like when my arms and legs ache after training all day. Something like that. Technically the brain doesn't feel pain, so it's not totally accurate. But, actually, yeah, just think of it that way. El Cid cut himself off mid-thought. Maybe he figured the rest would go over Leon's head, or that it wasn't time to explain it yet. Leon didn't press further and just rubbed his temples. Not like he had the energy for more learning anyway. As expected, El Cid didn't care about his groaning. The training went on, relentless as ever, no matter the time or place. Questions came flying in as soon as class ended and they walked out into the hallway. When Leon was eating in the dining hall while watching students pass by, and on the way back to the dormitory after the evening training session, the broken tile in the hallway, what shape was the tile 3 spaces to the left of it? Square. It was a pentagon, you idiot. The guy walking next to that girl who passed you at around the 3-second mark. Was he wearing a belt or not? He was. What about a tie? 3rd floor of the dorms. Was the light on or off in the 12th room from the left? From your perspective, it was on. And the room above it? It was no, off. And the 4th room from the right on the 1st floor? After a barrage of trials, Leon finally made it to his room and collapsed, groaning in frustration. Arg! A single day of El Cid's vision training was rigorous enough to wreck even Leon, who prided himself on his mental toughness. His eyes burned and his head pounded. This wasn't like normal muscle soreness. In terms of physical activity, he had not done even half his usual workload, yet his mind was completely drained. At that moment, the sigil on the back of his hand flickered and El Cid spoke. Well, for a first day, you did okay. I'll give you points for not whining or asking for a break. Leon flinched and asked the obvious question. If I had asked, would you have let me take a break? Nope. El Cid answered curtly. Yeah, I thought so. Having spent all of his energy, Leon chuckled weakly at the ceiling. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been pushed this hard. He used to run laps until he vomited, gripping a wooden sword even when the skin on his palms tore. At some point, that pain had become routine. He punished his body without even thinking. However, Today this was the first time in ages his mind had been worn out. Cid waited a beat before continuing, letting him recover a little. Getting used to something also means you've stopped growing. There's a limit to what you can achieve through the same type of training. Repetition has its benefits, but your body starts finding shortcuts. That's the problem. What do you mean by shortcuts? How is my body taking one? I'm saying you get used to the method. Run laps on a training ground long enough and you'll struggle on uneven ground. Do nothing but push-ups, and you'll find it hard to press from other angles. That's why you need variety. Leon finally understood the training from earlier that morning. So that's why you made me hop on one leg, or run the track doing a handstand, right? You needed to find things that felt unnatural to you. The human body was far more delicate and complex than most people realized. Depending on how someone trained or lived, their bones, muscles, and nervous systems could develop in wildly different ways. Sailors had extraordinary balance from living on waves. Hunters had an instinctive sense of direction from life in the forest. And nomads had incredible eyesight because they were used to scanning far distances. Training was about building strengths and compensating for weaknesses. And Cid had identified those elements in Leon right away. Your strengths are your stamina, forged through insane training, and the sword foundation you built from your discipline and mental fortitude. Your weakness, that foundation of yours is stuck stiff, if you will. You lack physical and mental flexibility. Flexibility? What about swordsmanship or my inability to use aura? Leon asked, sounding surprised. He had heard the same advice from teachers and students alike. Swear loyalty to a decent noble house, and one would gain access to real swordsmanship and cultivation techniques. Those were what would make one stronger. When Leon muttered that, Cid just snorted. Swordsmanship is just how you move your sword. If you can freely apply your fundamentals to different situations, that is swordsmanship. Sure, some techniques are ridiculously powerful, but what noble house hands out their secrets just because? You swear an oath? Fair point. As for aura, don't make me laugh. Did that lion brat beat you with aura? Leon let out a short sigh, then shook his head slowly as he came to the realization that there was no doubt Lion, a high-ranking noble's son, could use aura. Leon just hadn't seen it. Since Leon couldn't use it himself, Lion simply hadn't bothered. However, if anything, Lion likely possessed a stronger aura than anyone else at the academy. Leon also knew that this meant learning aura now wouldn't help him defeat Lion. No matter how fast he picked it up, it wasn't going to bridge the gap in time. Cid sensed Leon's understanding and added, besides, if a kid with no background suddenly starts wielding aura, people are bound to get suspicious. That's why I'll start teaching you aura after you leave the academy. Oh, that makes sense, Leon exclaimed as he nodded with genuine admiration. While he had only been focused on getting stronger, Cid had factored in the entire situation. That level of foresight felt worthy of a legendary hero's spiritual avatar. So for now, keep focusing on how to see. We've got to knock that guy flat as soon as possible and get out of this place. Got it. I'm fired up now. Gone was the shriveled husk collapsed on the bed. Leon leaped up, brimming with energy again. But it seemed like even that much wasn't enough for Cid. Nope. Still not there. What? Didn't I tell you? Keep doing the same kind of training and your body starts slacking off. You really gave it your all today, but repeat this kind of training enough, and you'll lose interest fast. A vague sense of dread crawled down Leon's spine. He asked cautiously, what are you gonna do? Then, nothing much. Starting tomorrow, you'll just get a small punishment every time you answer wrong. A punishment? Want me to show you a little taste? Just to see what it's like. Leon hesitated, briefly considering refusing it, but then nodded in acceptance. It wasn't realistic to expect he'd never get anything wrong, so he figured it would be better to experience it once now and brace himself for the real thing. Maybe it would help sharpen his nerves, too. However, it didn't take long for him to realize that even that resolve hadn't been enough. The instant the mark on the back of his hand flared, Leon spasmed like he'd been struck by lightning. GHGRRRK. HHHKK. Ah, the pain was unimaginable beyond anything he had ever conceived. Like a cramped muscle being crushed between fingers, or a tendon twisted with metal tongs. Leon writhed on his bed, unable even to scream. It lasted maybe 5 seconds, but in those 5 seconds, Leon broke into a cold sweat like he'd emptied a whole glass of water. He had been hit hard enough to crack bones before. He had even fallen from a horse and broken a leg once, but none of that compared to this. Oops, maybe that was too much. I'll dial it down a little, Elsid murmured to himself, then offered a perfectly reasonable explanation. It's not like I'm torturing you for fun. They say fear is a powerful motivator, and it's true. Your willpower isn't bad, but even strong minds need a push from behind now and then. Still, this was just way too moo. That one was just because it was your first time I couldn't calibrate it properly. I'll go easier next time, though if you keep getting things wrong, the pain's going up again. But that's on you, right? The so-called holy sword, Elsid, offered those words of encouragement in his usual cheerful voice, utterly crushing Leon's soul in the process, who sat there in shocked silence. I shall take your silence as an agreement. All right, then, let's do our best again tomorrow. Why you? Damn cursed sword. In that moment, roughly 70% of Leon's respect for Holy King Roderick evaporated. 1 month flew by, and the day Leon had drawn Elsid the holy sword was already 30 days ago. It was a long time or a short one, depending on how one looked at it. However, for Leon, every single day had been hell. Elsid's training had pushed him to the literal edge of his endurance. There wasn't a scrap of energy left in him at the end of each day. The moment he hit his bed, he blacked out. Not a second was wasted. Every waking moment was training. Even Leon, infamous for his obsessive work ethic, had barely survived it. He amazed even himself for not giving up. Alas, all that effort seemed to be paying off as a familiar kind of questions came from Elsid. How many pigeons were on the dorm roof just now? 11, Leon answered without opening his eyes, standing on the sparring grounds after a quick lunch. The answer came almost instantly, nothing like the early days, when he'd fumbled even after several seconds of thinking. Still, Elsid wasn't about to let it go at that. He continued his questions. What color were the 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 10th pigeons from the right? Gray, gray, white, gray. Which one flew away first? The 6th one. How many birds were sitting by the open window? Leon paused for a second under the barrage of questions, then smiled. There weren't any pigeons. Just a crow. Correct. A clean evasion of Elsid's trap. They'd moved past the simple Q and A phase by the 2nd week. After that, Elsid started mixing in trick questions to mess with Leon's judgment, and Leon, in turn, had to get reacquainted with the loving punishment he had hoped never to feel again. It had been another 2 weeks of unrelenting pain. No matter how many times he experienced it, the punishment never got easier. With bloodshot eyes, Leon pushed through day after day of brutal mental training. And finally today, he scraped together a passing grade. It still takes a conscious effort for you to notice things, but for 1 month, that's not bad. You think so? Today, I'll cut you some slack. Take a break. Yes? Leon raised his arms triumphantly and slumped to the ground. It was his first real break in a month. Elsid always caught the exact moment Leon's focus slipped. Then, right on cue, he'd fire off a question and deliver a merciless shock. At first, Leon had wanted to tear his hair out from the sheer agony. However, over time, he started to get it. Fear really was an effective teacher. They said a lazy man would sit still when hungry, but whip him once, and he'll be sprinting in no time. That was exactly what Elsid's punishment was for. Even Leon, with his insane endurance, had reached his limits during long stretches of focus, but one good zap from the sword, and his mind would snap back into clarity like a bucket of cold water. As that old saying goes, fight fire with fire. He had surpassed what he once believed were his limits more than once. Leon. That familiar, vaguely irritating voice pricked at Leon's ear, one he hadn't heard in a while. His face hardened automatically as he turned. Just as he expected, Lion was standing there, looking at him with a slightly unfamiliar expression. Leon met Lion's gaze and spoke calmly. It's been a while, Lion. It really had been a while. Ever since his training with Elsid began, Leon's schedule, already tight, had become completely isolating. Whether he was eating or doing physical drills, he had no bandwidth for anything else. He never knew when Elsid would throw a question at him, so he couldn't afford distractions. Naturally, it had been at least 2 weeks since he had even spoken to his love, Chloe, let alone Lion. Lion stepped forward with a cheerful smile and said, running off to the training yard right after lunch. Huh? I wouldn't expect anything else from you, Leon. It was as if he were trying to smooth over the tension with light banter. Whatever serious expression he had worn earlier had completely vanished. He stopped a short distance away, about 4 steps. Then, in a tone far too casual for what was about to follow, he said, I came by just in case. I'm relieved. Relieved about what? Leon replied curtly. Lion, shrugging off Leon's snap, explained, "You haven't asked to spar in almost a month. I was starting to think maybe you'd given up, like the others. But looking at your face now, seems like you haven't just yet. You can see that." Leon's reply dripped with hostility. But Lion answered without hesitation, "I can. A genius could always recognize the moment someone gave up. That sharp, overwhelming force called talent had shattered pride and left either resentment or admiration in its wake. Some called it charisma, and Lion wielded that charisma more times than he could count, so he knew. The look of someone who's given up. It's nothing like yours." Leon hadn't surrendered. Lion saw that clearly, and it pleased him. Had Leon caved like everyone else, he might have been disappointed. However, this also meant that things would only get harder. A contradiction, maybe, but that flicker of emotion stirred within him. Of course, Leon had no way of knowing what Lion was really feeling. Yeah, you're amazing. The great Lion can even read people's minds," Leon muttered. "So what, you came all the way here just to say that? If you're done, get lost." Lion let out a dry chuckle at the dismissal and replied, "You're so cold, Leon. It's been a while since we've talked. You could at least humor me for a few more words. What's there to say between us? Give me 10 minutes. That's all I ask for." Leon sighed, weary from Lion's persistence. Lion, taking that as a yes, sat down nearby without waiting for permission. His usual playful glint faded from his green eyes, replaced by something more serious. What he was about to say wasn't going to come from a fellow student Lion. "You've heard the rumors, right? That I'm not a commoner." "Rumors, huh?" Leon muttered and then twisted his lips, glancing over at Lion. "No need to beat around the bush. Doesn't seem like you've tried very hard to hide it anyway. Or would you like me to address you with appropriate respect from now on?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what is?" Lion's expression darkened with solemn weight. There was pressure in the air, the atmosphere of someone raised as royalty. Resolve forged through hardship glinted in his eyes. He didn't quite radiate majesty just yet, but it was only a matter of time. His voice naturally carried that growing weight. "Right now, I'm not speaking as your junior at the academy. Think of this as the real Lion, with his identity hidden." Leon nodded, understanding the implications. Fine, it might have been an open secret, but concealing his identity clearly served a purpose. And for Lion to reveal it so directly, it could easily carry danger to both sides. Having reset the tone, Lion paused briefly, then spoke. "You know I've been unilaterally accepting your spar requests, right?" "I do." Even with how relaxed the academy was about student duels, no one challenged Lion as frequently as Leon did. Lion could have refused any time. He didn't even need to invoke his status to avoid the matches. The only reason their bouts continued was because Lion allowed it. He'd humored Leon out of generosity, letting him keep trying, even after loss after loss. To put it plainly, Lion could have ended it at any time. "So let's finish it, once and for all," Lion declared, finally drawing the line after more than 3 years. "Finish it? Oh, I don't mean right this second. I'm saying let the next match be our last. Like always, no aura, just pure swordsmanship. But this time, not with wooden swords, with training blades." After his declaration, Lion watched Leon closely, gauging his reaction with a faint smile. Whatever answer he found, he moved on to the real reason he'd come all the way out to the training grounds. "And if I win that match, you'll become my retainer." It was not only a declaration, but a deliberate challenge that would define their relationship. Leon replied without changing his expression. "So it's a wager. But what makes you think I would keep that promise? It's not a magical contract. A verbal agreement is easy to walk away from." Lion dismissed the idea with confidence. "Walk away? Ha! Most people would, probably. But I know you, Leon. You're someone who's driven himself for years on nothing but pride. You're standing here right now because you refuse to bend even a little. Is that a compliment or an insult? I'm saying I trust your word. You're the type who'll do whatever it takes to honor a promise you made. HMPH. Denying it now would just make him look like a hypocrite." Leon scoffed and let the comment pass. Then, staring straight at Lion, who was clearly waiting for his response, Leon threw the question back at him, not so different from an acceptance. "If I lose, I become your retainer. That's the deal, right?" "Yes." "Then what if I win?" Leon's question wasn't the kind of thing someone who had never won even once should mutter, but his voice was nothing but serious. He wasn't bluffing or hoping for a miracle. He truly meant it. He intended to fight to win. Anyone else might have laughed at such bold yet unfounded words, but not Lion. As if he had expected them, he simply nodded and laid out terms he had clearly prepared in advance. I'll grant you whatever you ask for, as long as it doesn't bring dishonor to my name or family. That includes secret sword techniques, aura training methods, or even elixirs. All right, I get to choose when we fight. That okay? Just let me know once you're ready. I'll need at least 3 days' notice to prepare a proper venue. Though nothing about their pact was binding, the two men reached an agreement without a shred of doubt between them. This was the moment of the first true battle between the two men. Leon, the hero chosen on the whim of the Holy Sword, and Lion, the prince who sought to reclaim the imperial throne. I've got a bad feeling about this, Leon muttered after finally calming the competitive fire in his chest. After his conversation with Lion, it was just a stray thought, born of 3 years of defeat and the bitter weight of inferiority toward Lion. He himself didn't mean much with it, but someone didn't let that casual murmur slide. What was that? You have a bad feeling? You had your slick comebacks ready a minute ago, and now you're telling me you're scared? And no, that's not it. Leon broke into a cold sweat and waved his hands in panic at El Cid's annoyed tone. Not much would be more shameful and unjust than earning another punishment because of a simple slip of the tongue. He racked his brain desperately and managed to pull out an honest answer. I was just wondering, am I really stronger now? Yeah, the last month of training was brutal, but I still don't really feel all that much stronger, you know? For some reason, El Cid seemed satisfied with that answer and reassured him, don't worry. You may not realize it yet, but you've already gotten a lot stronger. You think so? The way to see is different from building raw muscle. It's a different kind of strength, and we haven't actually put it to use yet. So of course you wouldn't feel the change. Besides, well, I've tweaked a thing or two on my part, too, so relax. Oh, El Cid, speaking half to Leon and half to himself, suddenly remembered something and asked, Leon, didn't you say there's a physical assessment today? You remembered? Of course. You'd better get excited. You're about to experience something way beyond your expectations. After today, you won't be able to doubt your progress again. Huh? Leon tilted his head, confused. What did this sword mean by looking forward to the assessment? He hadn't done much physical training lately. What with all the focus on seeing, at most, he'd done a bit of stretching and warm-ups. What results could he possibly expect when he hadn't learned anything new? Whether El Cid sensed his doubt or not, he didn't offer further explanation, just told Leon to trust him. And so, with zero answers and plenty of confusion, the day's class began. The instructor stood on the podium and gave the usual orders. All right, line up in order of your student number. If you're not feeling well, step aside and give your name. Everyone else, start warming up. Leon followed along and stretched out his arms and legs. The physical assessment was done without aura, purely a measure of natural athletic ability. Because of that, it was one of the few areas where the noble and commoner classes weren't graded separately. Even so, the top scores almost always came from the noble class. I think I was ranked 9th last time. Even after pushing his body to the limit, the best Leon could do was barely make it into the top 10. Aura or not, nobles simply had a head start. They were raised on elixirs and trained in special conditioning techniques from a young age, and those on top of having learned aura were more than enough to strengthen the body significantly. Even making it to 9th without any of that was a big deal. What about that Lion guy? Where's he ranked? First. Oh, so. He wasn't as insane about training as you are, but I could tell he wasn't coasting either. He's not like the other rich brats, who are complacent just because they got lucky with status at birth. Leon glanced at Lion briefly, then turned forward and centered his focus. If El Cid was right, then today would bring something new. No harm in sharpening his mindset. As Leon prepared himself, the assessments began. The first event was a short distance run, a standard test. Of course, short meant 2 laps round the training grounds. At 400 meters per lap, that was a grueling 800 meters total. Go! The first group of cadets burst forward all at once at the instructor's signal, kicking up a cloud of dust in the still air. These were would-be knights. Their stamina was no joke. Even the slowest runner barely passed the 2-minute mark. Lion ran it in the minute 20 range last time. For a run without aura, that was absurd. Leon had only managed a minute 40, and Lion beat that by nearly 20 seconds. Even among nobles, Lion was in a league of his own. Don't back down before you even start. Hell, don't back down even after you start. This time you've got me backing you. Ida, I'll trust you. Holy sword. Ho ho. That's the spirit. With El Cid's encouragement ringing in his ears, Leon stepped forward when his number was called. As the other cadets in his group got into position, he stood at the white chalk line. The instructor raised his hand, signaling the start. Leon's thighs tightened like drawn bowstrings, muscles coiled to launch him forward. Then, go! The instructor's hand dropped. Leon and the others kicked off the ground. Zump! Chunks of earth flew up in clumps. The still air pressed hard against Leon's face. Strands of hair whipped back and tickled his ears. As he surged ahead of everyone else, Leon couldn't help but be astonished. What the? Why am I so fast? It was a speed so unfamiliar that it made Leon feel like a stranger in his own body. The fellow cadets who had started beside him were already far behind. Leon had widened the gap even before completing the first lap. Something the old Leon never could have done. Feeling a strange sense of dissonance, Leon recalled El Cid's words, "You'd better get excited. You're about to experience something way beyond your expectations." And he had. This definitely exceeded everything Leon had known to be possible. Physical ability wasn't something that improved overnight. Even with daily training over long periods, progress was incremental, sometimes barely noticeable. Clearly, El Cid had done something, but Leon couldn't figure out what, and that only made it more baffling. Before he could even begin to work through that confusion, he finished the second lap. Leon, that's 1 minute and 29 seconds, the instructor exclaimed in disbelief. Leon had finished ahead of the rest of his group by more than half a lap, and beaten his own best time by over 10 seconds. He had just barely cracked into the minute 20 range, on par with Lion. Several more students crossed the finish line after him, and once the records were all marked, the instructor walked straight up to Leon, stammering in shock. Leon, did you awaken your aura? It was a fair question. There were only 2 ways to improve physical performance that drastically in just a few weeks: taking high-grade elixirs or awakening aura. And since Leon had no family backing him, elixirs were out of the question. That left aura. Leon almost smiled but shook his head and answered, "No, sir." Then, "Would you mind if I checked myself?" "Go ahead, sir." With Leon's consent, the instructor grabbed his wrist. This was the most common method to test for aura. By flowing a small trace of aura into someone's body, they could check for resistance. If the subject had awakened aura, it would bounce the flow right back. But the instructor immediately let go, his face a picture of disbelief as he muttered, "You really haven't awakened it. And yet, in just a few weeks. Leon, what kind of training have you been doing?" Leon was as clueless as the instructor was, so he answered honestly, "Just the basics, sir. Honestly, I've had more rest than usual lately. You'd know better than anyone." "That's true. Your training load was insane before. Maybe your body finally took this chance to recover after all those years of overtraining." "No, that still doesn't explain it." The instructor furrowed his brows, thinking it over, but gave up and called the next round of students to the line. He had accepted Leon's result. As soon as Leon returned to his spot, he closed his eyes. He had a few things to say to El Cid, and it was also the best way to avoid getting dragged into conversations with curious classmates who were rushing over to him. "El Cid, what the hell did you do to me?" "Well, told you, didn't I?" El Cid chuckled, clearly enjoying Leon's shock. It felt like the sword was dragging it out on purpose. But Leon couldn't wait any longer. "Quit laughing and explain. This kind of change doesn't come from just cutting back on workouts, right? Like the instructor said?" "Of course not." El Cid finally started explaining, as if it was nothing. "Here's what you need to understand first, Leon. Where do you think strength actually comes from? You're not asking something philosophical, are you? Biologically. Oh, then muscles. Correct." As soon as Leon answered, El Cid continued, "Then what makes a muscle strong? How do you actually increase muscle strength?" After a brief hesitation, Leon answered again, "By increasing their size or density?" "That's right. Most of the physical training methods in the world focus on one of those 2 things. But El Cid didn't stop there. He offered a third factor. Without understanding neuromuscular function, you're only getting half the picture. Neuromuscular? You know what the nervous system is, right? Naturally, muscles have nerves too, and the strength you can produce is directly related to how developed those nerve pathways are. That's why someone's physical strength isn't always reflected in their build. Even most of the academy instructors didn't know this, and that wasn't surprising. Knowledge at this level was typically passed down in secret. within noble martial families. If you didn't learn it from someone, you had no way of knowing, and those who did know held an overwhelming advantage. It was one of the reasons the gap between nobles and commoners rarely flipped. Muscle density tends to be genetically fixed, and there's a clear limit to how much you can grow muscle mass. You were already pushing those limits, so I focused on developing your neuromuscular system. Leon was getting the gist of this new lesson, but he still had one lingering question. Okay, I think I follow, but how exactly did you develop it? I never did any training like that. Don't tell me you poked around my brain while I was sleeping. El Cid then proceeded to shoot down Leon's guess and drop the truth like it was nothing. As if, that punishment I've been giving you? That was the training. Your nervous system had been locked up for over 10 years. Breaking through that in such a short time was bound to hurt like slicing muscle with a blade. Leon's mouth fell open. A single word of shock slipped out without him realizing. Wah! All those times he'd writhed in agony from El Cid's punishments during vision training. Those had been nervous system reactivation. He barely swallowed back a curse and asked, "Why the hell didn't you tell me that earlier?" "Because that way, it's more upsetting for you and more satisfying for me." Leon blinked repeatedly in disbelief. But El Cid wasn't done. You only managed to finish the basics of seeing in a month because of the pain. But now that you know it was inevitable pain, something you were going to go through anyway, do you really think you'd be able to focus like you did yesterday? I doubt it. Oh, don't bother thanking me. By the way, I'm just doing what any holy sword ought to do. Still, feels good to have something go right for once. Now that Leon understood the full story, he looked down at the back of his left hand. Sure, it had helped him in the end, but not for a second did he feel even remotely thankful. He had suffered for a month straight with no warning, because feeling upset makes training more effective. If he could be grateful for that, he might as well be a saint. This holy sword, no better than a sadistic bastard, was supposed to house the soul and spirit of the great hero Roderick. But if that were truly the case, maybe Roderick hadn't been a great hero at all. Maybe he had been history's most successful villain. Shockingly, that guess wasn't far from the actual truth, but without hard evidence. Leon's suspicion couldn't be confirmed. He finally growled, glaring at the mark on his hand. "Hey, be honest, you're actually a cursed sword, aren't you?" The physical assessment, thrown into a frenzy by Leon's sudden leap in performance, finally wrapped up after 3 hours. He was still furious at El Cid's twisted, sadistic character, but even Leon had to admit the results spoke for themselves. He had placed second in the rankings that combined both the commoner and noble class, leaving everyone in dust, though he still couldn't overtake Lion. Even that wasn't enough to beat Lion, Leon muttered, noticing that Lion had also slightly improved his own and managed to hold onto first place. Perhaps he was spurred on by Leon's new record. You really thought you could beat him after just 1 month? Don't start getting smug on me. I know. It was just a thought. Born with superior genes, raised on expensive elixirs, and trained by the best instructors, that was a noble's advantage. Without a ridiculous cheat code named El Cid, Leon would never have narrowed the gap in the first place. However, the reality was that he had jumped from 9th to 2nd place, and that alone was impressive. He wasn't planning to settle here, of course, but the only thing left to do now was keep pushing. I can beat him. Leon clenched both fists, his confidence blazing. Thinking about what El Cid had done still made his skin crawl, but that pain had made this possible. It wasn't just his sprinting speed that had improved. His entire body had changed from raw strength to explosive reflexes, all of it. He just hadn't noticed earlier because El Cid had deliberately restricted physical training. Bad habits picked up during neuromuscular development are hard to break, and you didn't really have the headspace for anything beyond the way to see. Everything I do has a reason, you know? You could have told me that sooner. Why don't you, for once, just think maybe there's a reason why I didn't tell you? At El Cid's unapologetic reply, Leon looked down at the glowing sigil on the back of his hand and shivered. He desperately wanted to punch it, but all that would do was hurt himself. Had he made a mistake drawing the holy sword that day? Maybe he was actually duped by a cursed sword in disguise, not chosen by a holy sword. Hey, I told you I'm not a cursed sword. As if to aid El Cid's protest, the symbol on his hand flashed with holy light. Leon's headache immediately worsened. Merciful goddess, why this of all things for a holy sword? Leon thought before eventually giving up and flopping back on his bed. Whether he liked it or not, El Cid's methods worked. He just had zero regard for Leon's feelings. Unfortunately, The results were clear, so if this was part of the Holy Sword's trials, then fine. He would endure it. Whatever. What's the training plan for tomorrow? Leon asked. Let's see. You're past the stage where the way to see is just memorization, and there's not much more I can do to tweak your body. Now you need experience, learn how to use what you've gained. That doesn't sound easy, which is exactly why I said we need to get out of here. This was an academy for nobles, dozens of whom were high-status heirs. There was no way they'd let anyone gather live combat experience in a place like this. The campus was so well patrolled that even nearby monsters had long been wiped out. Knowing all that, El Cid gave a resigned sigh and pivoted. Well, can't be helped. Let's just recalibrate your sword forms to match your new body. Practice some unorthodox movements, keep using the way to see, and stay sharp. You're still not gonna teach me any sword techniques. You can't use any of my techniques until you awaken aura. Like I said before, up to a certain point, all you need is flexible use of fundamentals. Stop fantasizing about sword techniques already. El Cid's tone was practically scolding. He continued, without aura, swordsmanship is just movement. Secret techniques might throw people off once, but once your opponent sees through the trick, they're easy to counter. Do you really think someone like Lion who fights in a purely traditional style would fall for some flashy gimmick? Then what should I do? Play to your strengths. A sword tempered through years of hard work is solid. Now that your physical abilities caught up, not even Lion can dominate against you. But El Cid suddenly trailed off, paused, and then continued. What you really need now is actual combat experience. Man, if only someone would just pick a fight with you out of nowhere. This isn't some back alley slum. What kind of idiot would pick a fight at the academy? You're right, yeah. Leon and El Cid sighed together, almost in sync. It was ridiculous. The Holy Sword and the hero, chosen to bring peace to the world, sitting around wishing someone would just randomly start a fight with them. If the church ever caught wind of this, they'd probably weep blood and beg them to repent. But before the church could do anything, someone found them first, the very next day. So you're that peasant named Leon? At the sudden confrontation, Leon could only blink, stunned. The crests on their uniforms clearly marked them as noble class students, and there were 6 of them, all standing around him in a loose circle. Leon had no idea what was going on, but luckily, one of them was happy to explain. Second place. A peasant like you? You cocky bastard. You must have cheated behind the instructor's back, but you're not fooling us. El Cid, who caught on even faster than Leon, cheered. Oh man, some things really haven't changed in 300 years. There may have been eras without heroes, but never in history had there been an era without idiots. And as if to prove that point, the ones surrounding Leon now made their hostility plain. Their eyes brimmed with jealousy, disdain, and suspicion. They were the sort who judged a person's worth solely by their birthright, who doubted someone else's success before ever questioning their own inadequacies. Knowing that, Leon could already guess what they were after. He said, "If you've got complaints about the rankings, why don't you take it up with the instructor?" It was the textbook answer, but they wouldn't have come all this way if that was all it was going to take. As if they were waiting for Leon to say just about anything, they snapped back. A commoner dares to talk back. You better spill what kind of trick you pulled. We already knew it was strange when a guy who never pledged loyalty to any house was ranked 9th. Now you're showing your true colors. Which house is backing you? There was no reasoning with them. Well, that was presumably because talking was never their intention from the start. They had grown up in a world where their tantrums were accommodated without question. No matter how talented a commoner might be, all it took was a kick from a noble, like themselves, to put them back in their place. Whether Leon's ranking was legitimate or not didn't matter to them. They were just here to rip out the weed that had grown where it shouldn't. Then, a young man with soft golden hair stepped in, waving his hand to settle the group. Now, gentlemen, let's not get too worked up. Of course, he wasn't doing this to help Leon. Everything was going exactly according to his plan. Surveying the noble cadets who had so readily followed his lead, the young man spoke with the smug poise of someone delivering a performance. Even if he's a commoner, we're all cadets here. That means we should administer a punishment that suits this setting. Like the distinguished nobles we are, of course. Don't you agree? Well said, Elmont. Truly, the pride of House Bourbon. Leon couldn't help but scoff aloud at the ridiculous theater, but his brows twitched the moment he heard the name. Elmont, of House Bourbon. El Cid also jumped in. Bourbon? What, is that some big shot family? He looks like a second stringer, dragging around losers like this. Responding to El Cid while analyzing the situation, Leon recalled the name clearly. He was ranked second until the last assessment. If I remember right, he's the second son of Count Bourbon. There were rumors he turned out bitter because his older brother's too perfect. I guess getting bumped down the rankings didn't sit well with him. But he's not pulling this with Lion? Lion's practically untouchable. There was no way the nobles weren't interested in Lion, even with his identity masked. Yet none had dared to uncover it, proving just how formidable his background must be. At a minimum, it had to be a Marquis household, if not royalty from another country. Yeah, nobles are the best at kissing up to the strong and stepping on the weak. Speaking from experience. Before El Cid could answer, Elmont, having whipped his crowd into just the right mood, stepped up to Leon. Then, with a composed smile, he extended his left hand. Apologies for our first meeting being so unpleasant, Leon. I imagine this seems unfair to you, but we nobles couldn't just sit by. I hope you'll consider my proposal. Leon didn't even look at the offered hand and replied, "Let's hear the details first." Someone in the back barked out, "How dare he speak with such insolence?" But Elmont held up a finger and smiled, as if he were willing to generously let Leon speak. After all, if things went his way, he could deal with this disrespect later. El Cid instantly saw through the act and said, "Ugh, baby-faced brat, rotten to the core. These other guys are just backup dancers. He set this whole thing up himself. Let me guess, he's about to offer some totally fair challenge that's rigged from the start. Probably something like, how about a few duels with an instructor present?" Elman offered. Leon tilted his head slightly at the suggestion, and then remembered exactly what El Cid had just said. Elmont hadn't mentioned anything about not using aura. In other words, he and his cronies intended to use theirs freely. Leon hadn't awakened aura yet, but if he raised that objection, they would probably accuse him of using tricks to fool the instructor again. And if he refused the match outright, they'd slander him another way. Just as he hesitated, unsure how to respond, he noticed Lion watching the scene from a distance. Lion. They'd clashed enough times over the years for Leon to immediately read the look in his eyes. If he asked for help now, Lion would intervene without a word. Ironically, that was what pushed Leon over the edge. Yeah, no thanks. Accepting help from a rival was no different from begging, and to Leon, that was more humiliating than any insult. Worse than a challenge. It was charity. Shrugging off Lion's gaze, Leon stood tall and confident. "All right," he said to Elmont. "Oh, you accept my offer?" "Yes." Elmont's brows twitched in surprise, but then he grinned. Lion, who had been eavesdropping from afar, nearly did a double take. A mock duel that was clearly a setup for a beating, and Leon just agreed. All Leon had to do was nod once and Lion would have stepped in. However, Leon wasn't finished. On one condition, Instructor Helmet will oversee the match. 1 duel per day with each of you, and the results are to be kept confidential. I trust that's a fair enough request? Instructor Helmet, huh? For the first time, Elmont's confident mask faltered, and so did the expressions of the nobles beside him. Instructor Helmet was notorious for being the strictest, most principled teacher at the academy. Thanks to his career achievements and old connections, even high-ranking noble heirs didn't dare mess with him. If he was the one supervising, there'd be no room for tricks. Elmont finally nodded after a short pause and replied, "Fine, I accept those terms." The rest didn't matter anyway. No way a commoner could beat him, instructor or no. The only downside was that he couldn't beat Leon half to death to really blow off steam. Shame that. After that, they quickly worked out the schedule, exchanged a few hollow pleasantries out of obligation, and Elmont's gang finally dispersed. Leon, also with a lot on his mind, turned and headed back toward the dorms. Lion looked like he had something to say, but Leon had no intention of giving him the time. Not until their next match. He didn't plan to meet with him in private again before then. Who knew I'd get to experience live combat like this? Leon muttered as he changed clothes in his room. It turned out El Cid had been right whether he meant to be or not. Someone really had come out of nowhere and picked a fight. Maybe the saying about speaking things into existence wasn't so wrong after all. Worked out great, didn't it? If I were a cursed sword, I'd have summoned some orcs by now or something. But new apparently. I'm a holy sword and I'm not allowed to do anything fun. Is that really something a supposed holy king should say? Better coming from someone like me than from those high and mighty church guys, who've never even swung a sword. Honestly, from a pure utility standpoint, Cursed swords are more useful. It has a passive drain skill, no property restriction when using spells, and no seals. Way fewer limitations. Leon was speechless. What would the church say if they ever heard this? The same church that revered Holy King Roderick as the chosen apostle of the goddess? They would probably melt the sword down on the spot or accuse it of being possessed by a demon impersonating a hero and start an exorcism. Thank the goddess only Leon could hear this voice. Leon decided to shift the topic, uncomfortable with the conversation. So, do you think I can actually beat them without aura? I've never fought someone who can use it, so I'm not sure. What? Of course, you can. Leon was caught off guard by El Cid's instant confirmation of his victory. They're just a bunch of amateurs barely past the beginner stage. At most, they'll boost their power a little or reinforce their swings. Just dodge and counter. Easy. You say that like it's no big deal. It is no big deal. For you, anyway. Leon still lacked confidence, but El Cid meant every word. As naturally as the sun rose every morning, he believed Leon would flatten them with ease. After a moment of thinking, El Cid had a flash of inspiration. Actually, let me show you. That'll be faster. Before Leon could ask, show me what? The mark on the back of his left hand flared with light and a new window of text appeared before his eyes. Name, Leon. Title and class, hero who can't even use aura yet. Level, 18. Strength, 119D. Endurance, 124D. Agility, 115D. Aura, 0. Skills, Sword Mastery I Max. Roderick's Vision. Acquired Martial Rudai. Leon blinked and asked, El Cid, what the hell is this? What do you think? That's your current stat window. And this one here, this is that Elmont or Dalmont guy, whatever his name is. Don't expect perfect objectivity, it's based on my standards. Next to Leon's, another window popped up. Name, Elmont Bourbon. Title and class, Brad who is blinded by inferiority. Level, 15. Strength, 97E. Endurance, 89E. Agility, 82E. Aura, 63E. Skills, Sword Mastery I6. Secret Sword Technique I, Aura Wielder I. Even without further explanation, Leon could grasp the meaning. Comparing the two screens, he muttered suspiciously, wait, Elmont's really this weak. He's a Count's second son. He must have guzzled down all kinds of elixirs and gone through intense training growing up. El Cid replied, doesn't matter how many elixirs he took. If he can't digest them, they're just expensive soup. And what he calls intense training, nothing compared to what you've done. Leon had never beaten Lion, and that had warped his self-perception and dented his self-confidence a bit. El Cid picked up on that and kept going. Without aura, the physical stat cap is around 99 rank E. But you, with my help and your own effort, broke through that wall. Even without aura, your raw strength is enough to go toe-to-toe with those clowns. So I won't be overpowered physically. Exactly. None of them are skilled enough to channel aura into their weapons yet. These fights will come down to pure technique, and when it comes to that, they've got nothing on you. El Cid was right. Leon had trained more than anyone else. He'd swung his sword day in and day out, never skipping, never compromising. He hadn't managed to beat Lion, but that didn't mean it was all for nothing. Those years of effort had been carved into his muscles and technique. Leon finally understood why El Cid was so confident. He clenched both fists and raised his head. It was time to stop aiming low and start reaching upward. You're right. There's no way I'm losing to someone like Elmont. However, just as he was about to move on, something caught his eye. Hold on. Why is that my title? What, you don't like it? Then get stronger, Leon. Back in my day, you weren't even called a hero unless you hit Swordmaster by 18. You crusty old cursed sword. And just like that, Leon's faith in the holy sword dropped another 10%. A few days had passed since the confrontation with Elmont. It was evening, and as always, the sun crossed the sky and sank westward, its trailing edge fading into twilight. The academy, once bustling with its cadets, had fallen silent as if the noise had never existed. Commuting cadets had all returned home, and even those in the dorms had likely finished dinner by now. There was no one around to cross paths with Leon as he headed toward the annex. His footsteps echoed down the empty corridor, a sound drowned out by the usual daytime noise now eerily clear. Leon listened to it, almost unfamiliar, and steeled his resolve. It had been a while since he sparred with anyone other than Lion. No one in the commoner class was a better dueling opponent, and Lion didn't bother with anyone else either. Some students had even misunderstood this as friendship, thinking Leon and Lion were close. Leon stopped in his tracks and muttered, "Ah, what is it?" El Cid asked, surprised by the sudden halt. "It's nothing. I just realized why Elmont's group suddenly decided to come after me." "Oh, and why's that?" As Leon resumed walking, he explained, "They left me alone before because I was always hanging around Lion. They must have figured I wasn't someone to mess with, but it's been over a month since we've even spoken, let alone trained together. They probably thought now was a good time to make a move. That confrontation in broad daylight the other day, I bet it was to see whether Lion would intervene. And if he had, they'd have backed off, claimed it was all a misunderstanding. It was a classic noble tactic to sniff around like a jackal at the scent of blood, but test the waters before making a move. After all, in politics, nothing derailed a plan like interference from someone higher up the social ladder. No risk, high return. That was the motto these ignorant nobles loved more than anything. Heh, what a joke." El Cid snorted in contempt. "No risk. What kind of fool thinks the world's that easy? Now they've fallen into their own trap. If they just picked a fight right then and there, maybe a few of them would have walked away with nothing worse than a bruised ego." Leon agreed. "You're not wrong. Worked out for me, though." Elmont's biggest mistake had been trying to avoid the Lion variable, which meant he failed to really observe Leon. He never asked why Leon seemed so confident or wondered why he didn't back down. He just dismissed it all as a desperate commoner's tantrum. Those who spent their lives looking down from high places rarely saw the stones beneath their feet. Leon stepped into the annex, saying in a cold tone, "I'll make sure to snap that arrogant nose of his." The moment he crossed the threshold, a deep voice greeted him. "You're here." It was Instructor Helmet, the strictest man in the academy, famous for his no-nonsense attitude. His hair, peppered with white, resembled a lion's mane. Even in his 60s, he was in impressive shape. The muscles pressing against his thick clothing looked like they could crush stone. From deep-set eyes, a sharp gaze studied Leon. With a flicker of surprise in his voice, Helmet said, "You've changed a lot in just a month. If this was one of those reckless spur-of-the-moment, adolescent conflicts, I would have stopped you. But it looks like you know what you're doing. Am I wrong, Leon?" "I'm not sure what you mean, sir." "Playing dumb, are we?" Despite the evasive reply, Helmet chuckled warmly. He had known about Elmont's group and their bullying, but as an instructor, there were limits to how much he could intervene. All he could do was ensure no one got seriously hurt. However, Helmet got a feeling that this would be the incident to break that cycle. "Go ahead and do whatever you want," he said to Leon. "Pardon, sir. I'm telling you to teach those idiots a lesson they won't forget." "Understood." Leon blinked in surprise, then nodded firmly. They soon arrived at the promised venue, a smooth, well-packed floor, in a ring 20 meters wide. A faintly glowing circle marked the boundary step out, and it counted as a loss. The noble boy who had arrived first shouted across the ring, "You, making a noble wait? You've got a death wish, you peasant." Standing beside him, Helmet scoffed under his breath. To his eyes, this kid from House Heinrich was like a rabbit trying to show off in front of a bear. Leon, unfazed by the bluster, walked calmly into the ring without saying a word. He simply stepped forward and took his place. "Sir, I'm ready," he declared. "Very well." Helmet responded before the noble boy could start ranting again. "Jeff Heinrich and Leon, you will commence in a duel under my supervision, pledging your honor and pride to this match. Jeff Heinrich, what is it you seek from this duel?" "For that commoner to confess his crimes, sir." Crimes, Helmet muttered as he cast a glance at Leon. But seeing the calm on his face, he simply let out a dry chuckle. Then he turned to Leon and asked the same question. "Leon, what is it you seek from this duel?" "That, after this, they stop interfering with me, sir." "Very well." Helmet nodded, sealing the terms from both sides. There are 2 roles assigned to a match observer. One was to judge the outcome fairly and impartially, and the other was to certify the agreed-upon terms of the duel. Now, only one thing remained for Leon and Jeff. "Raise your weapons." At Helmet's signal, both combatants raised their wooden swords instead of the usual dull-edged metal practice. Swords. Even dull-edged practice swords could cut if aura was imbued into them, and Helmet, knowing that Leon couldn't use aura, had stepped in to ensure the conditions were fair. And then, begin. Leon stepped forward the moment the word was spoken. "Want me to show you that guy's stats?" "No, I'm good." Leon declined El Cid's offer and narrowed his eyes. Knowing your opponent's stats was a massive advantage, but relying on that would only dull his instincts. Besides, no matter how strong he was, this guy was still just one of Elmont's underlings. Leon had no reason to lean on El Cid's power for this. His focus deepened and his vision widened, pulling in all information from all directions. No matter how minute, he had activated Roderick's vision, and for a moment, it felt like the world slowed to a crawl. The rush of data accelerated his mind to the point where every noise turned into a long, low whine. It was the kind of perception one might experience once in a lifetime in a do-or-die moment. The enemy moved in the slowed world. He's coming. Jeff Heinrich, was it? Leon probably wouldn't even remember his name after today. He didn't feel the need to have any reaction on his part, until he was finished scanning the gray hair, the blue tie, and the ring on his index finger. There was a diagonal slash, coming from the upper right toward the lower left. Such an obvious angle meant that there was a good chance it was a feint. Leon stepped half a pace to the side and thrust his sword forward. With a loud thwack, Leon's wooden sword slammed into the side of Jeff's head. Irk! With a grunt, Jeff collapsed like a sack of bricks, unconscious in a single blow. Leon stared at the scene, looking almost dazed. Did I really just win? That easily? He felt silly for getting even a little tense. Even Helmut, standing outside the ring, looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. El Cid, meanwhile, sounded smug. What did I say? Huh? See? You won. Perhaps the holy sword truly did contain the insight of a great hero. While Leon was quietly impressed, Jeff groaned and began to stir. Still clueless after being knocked out, he blinked in confusion and glanced around. Helmut didn't let the haze last long. He declared, Jeff Heinrich, you have lost. What? Jeff cried out in disbelief, staggering toward Leon. You think one lucky hit makes you the winner? That was a fluke. One more round, fight me again. It was an outrageously disrespectful outburst. Even if he was a noble and Leon was a commoner, it wasn't just the two of them present. Helmut's face, usually impassive, darkened with fury. That's enough. Jeff Heinrich, I will not tolerate another moment of... Leon interrupted. Sure, why not? Huh. Helmut blinked. Even he hadn't expected that. Letting go of a victory was unthinkable. Jeff, however, latched onto the response immediately. Ha ha, you may be a commoner, but at least you know your place. Very well, since you're showing some humility, I'll go easy on you this time. Leon didn't answer. He just raised his sword. He was accepting the rematch and he meant it. Still failing to grasp the situation, Jeff grinned and took up his stance again. Helmut, massaging the back of his neck, sighed deeply. Since both sides had agreed, there was nothing more he could do. Begin. Leon snorted at the weary call and looked ahead. El Cid chuckled, fully understanding Leon's intent behind the rematch. He said, all right, this time don't end it with one hit. Treat it as practice. Jeff probably thought Leon had given in, but he would soon realize it would have been better to accept the clean loss. The first strike had been a mercy. Once again, the world slowed. Leon shivered as the strange sensation washed over him. His opponent moved like he was underwater, every motion drawn out. Arms, legs, even his pupils were traceable. Having mastered Roderick's vision, Leon could follow it all. And in that moment, he predicted the next move before it even happened. And it was possible because he had tracked the movement from its starting point. He could now read exactly what would follow. He's gotten a little faster than before, but still, a horizontal thrust, then a downward slash from the right, then a flurry of follow-up attacks aimed at his neck, waist, knees, and shoulders. Leon dodged every strike with perfect precision. Even as Jeff's aura-enhanced movements picked up speed, all he managed was to graze Leon's sleeve once or twice. There it is. Overextended from his combo, Jeff's footwork faltered. Even with aura-enhanced strength, he had limits. Muscles stiffened and breathing grew ragged. Trying to overwhelm Leon with reckless attacks had backfired. Lacking real battle experience, Jeff had no idea how to manage stamina in a drawn-out fight. Leon struck his thigh with a blunt thwack. Graya. Jeff, unaccustomed to pain, shuddered violently but still didn't drop his sword. He staggered back a few steps, taking deep breaths and trying to regroup. He regretted anxiously rushing his attacks, but he gritted his teeth and shifted tactics. Foolish peasant. You should have finished me when you had the chance. A hit like that won't bring me down. However, what Jeff didn't realize as he thought this was that Leon very well could have finished him. He just hadn't. This fight was dragging on only because Leon was using him as a moving practice dummy to refine Roderick's vision in real time. Leon didn't want to end it in one blow again. He didn't want Jeff to pass out too soon. But he also wasn't about to let a single opening go unpunished. The once quiet annex filled with the rhythmic sound of beatings and Jeff's wails. Excellent. See, this is what I've been saying, training hits different when it's in real combat. The holy sword El Cid, allegedly a symbol of the merciful, benevolent goddess, cheered on the lopsided beating while offering helpful commentary, which sounded less like advice for a chosen hero and more like a tutorial from a back alley thug. Strike the shin lightly, it hurts more that way. The collarbone is fragile, go easy or it'll break in one shot. Don't hit the head too hard unless you want him to pass out right away. The more Leon listened, the more his strikes grew vicious. Soon, Jeff pleaded in desperation. I yield. Jeff finally tried to tap out, nearly 100 strikes in, but Leon didn't let him. And Helmet? Sure, he should have stepped in and stopped the duel. But he lowered Elmont's little crew enough to just clear his throat and look the other way. Leon was avoiding fatal points, after all. That was good enough. Leon wins. It took 2 full hours before Jeff was finally allowed to be dragged to the infirmary. The secret rebellion of Leon the Commoner had begun quietly, but its momentum only grew stronger. Starting with Jeff Heinrich, one by one, Elmont's cronies ended up in the infirmary at a consistent rate of 1 per day. Despite their awful personalities, the gang wasn't weak, and with each of their noble sacrifices, Leon's growth became even more pronounced. Without Roderick's vision, Leon couldn't have guaranteed victory. The raw strength of those born into nobility was not to be taken lightly, and perhaps because of that first match's outcome, none of them let their guard down, even though the results of their duels were kept confidential. The trips to the infirmary were documented in the admission log, so it didn't take much to figure out who won and who lost. Jeff, the first opponent, probably felt the most wronged. With a chuckle, El Cid said, whether it was the first match or not, he probably never expected to be outclassed that badly. Leon also chuckled to himself, recalling that day. Can't blame him. I didn't expect it either. It wasn't that he didn't trust El Cid, but he had simply been nervous. After all, he was going up against a noble who could use aura. However, he won. In one hit, at that. After the match against Jeff, he used the rest of the matches as an opportunity to train. He quickly realized that 1 strike was all it took against someone like Jeff. Such certainty might have seemed like arrogance, but he had earned it. The rest weren't much different. Their swordplay and martial arts were flashy but without substance. Their movements, overly reliant on aura, were fully exposed to Leon's sharpened eyes. However, El Cid decided to keep Leon on his toes. Today might be different. Don't let your guard down. Got it. As always, Leon headed to the annex as the sun dipped below the horizon. His shadow stretched long across the ground as he walked toward what would be the final match. Elmont Bourbon. Unlike the lower noble sons of random barons or viscounts, Elmont was on another level entirely. Even if he lived in the shadow of his older brother, there was no way someone of his rank had been neglected by his family. With aura in play, Elmont's physical strength will be above mine. And there was that one skill on his stat window. Was it secret sword technique? It was only at its first tier, but it was the unknown level, marked by, that made it dangerous. Even Leon's eyes might not be able to see through it. And that was probably why El Cid had warned him not to let his guard down going into this match. As usual, when he opened the door with a creak, Instructor Helmet was waiting. However, tonight, he had a strange look on his face. Leon immediately sensed something in his gaze. Worry, no uncertainty. And Leon understood why. Elmont had already arrived, standing inside the ring, staring daggers at Leon. Any pretense of politeness was long gone. He was the first to speak. I didn't think it would come to this. Leon smiled casually, unfazed by the glare, and stepped into the ring without hesitation. Is that so? I did. He narrowed his eyes, taking in Elmont's pale gold hair much like butter, a different shade than Lion's, but still blonde. A perfect warm-up before facing him. As Helmet stepped forward, Leon ran through his final checklist. My raw physical ability is better, but once you factor in aura, he's above me. And if he's capable of channeling it into his weapon, even blocking a strike of the wooden sword could be risky. A head-on clash was out of the question. Running from someone stronger and faster wasn't easy, but with Leon's eyes, it wasn't impossible. As his focus sharpened, Helmet's deep voice sent them flying forward. Begin. Elmont struck first with a thrust that was so fast it sliced a few strands of Leon's hair. It was a rapid jab, using the wrist and elbow for acceleration, meant to probe and suppress. Not powerful enough to pierce armor, but enough to break bone. A counter won't work, Leon thought to himself. There was too much of a difference in their speeds. In the time it took Leon to take one step back, 3 slashes came his way aimed at his neck, waist, and wrist. He dodged 2 and deflected the third at the last second. But even with a clean parry, his wrist stung. If he had tried to block all of them, his grip would have certainly suffered. He may be a punk, but he was a count's son. HMPH. I can see why those idiots lost. Elmont eyed him curiously. If he were just some arrogant commoner, he was someone to crush. But if he was worth recruiting as a pledge into his house, that was a different story. On Elmont's part, a few petty emotions were nothing if there was value to be gained. However, Leon had no interest in that. Elmont gasped, caught off guard. Just as he had opened his mouth to speak, Leon struck, aiming straight for his face. He was telling him that he wasn't here to chat. Elmont recoiled instinctively, gritting his teeth, and said, "You insolent peasant. Think you can get away with this just because you've got a few cheap tricks?" Maybe. Leon brushed off the insult with a shrug. But El Cid, apparently, couldn't let it slide. "Oh, Leon, what is it now? Did that little snot-nosed brat just call my technique cheap?" Leon couldn't find an appropriate response, realizing how Elmont's jab could have gotten to El Cid. El Cid took Leon's silence as confirmation and muttered coldly, "They say that time changes everything. I guess in 300 years, even I get dismissed by little brats who still have milk on their breath." El Cid, when a master is insulted, the disciple is the one who must answer. Leon felt a chill, and sure enough he knew there was no stopping El Cid now. His teeth. What? Let's knock out that bastard's teeth. 1 or 2's not enough, get as many as you can. Fail, and you will get your punishment. At the word punishment, Leon's grip on his sword tightened. It was an involuntary reaction that had been seared into him over a month of suffering. El Cid never took his words back, which meant Leon had no choice but to comply. A glint of bloodlust shimmered in his eyes as he stared down Elmont. It was screaming, "You're dead." What the hell? Elmont flinched instinctively at the murderous aura in Leon, not missing the moment. Charged like a bullet. Roderick's vision wasn't just good for countering. It was the pinnacle of insight, letting him see through every move his opponent could make. Leon's wooden sword swung in a savage arc, targeting Elmont's blind spot. With a loud thwack, Elmont blocked the blow from a poor stance and staggered backward. If not for the boost in reaction speed from aura, he wouldn't have been able to block at all. However, Leon didn't give him time to recover. He launched a relentless flurry of attacks. This wasn't someone who could be finished with 1 or 2 strikes. He had to create openings with precision and stack damage until the guy crumbled. Before Elmont could bring out that secret weapon of his, the secret sword technique, Leon had to smother him. Wooden swords crashed in a furious storm with thwacks and cracks. Leon's strikes stabbed forward with frightening precision, and Elmont, barely managing to block them all, fought to regain control. Leon had momentum, but Elmont's balance didn't break easily. Unlike the previous opponents, Elmont had progressed past the first level of aura use. He had been on the back foot from the start, but he wasn't in a hopeless position. Leon had brought the match to a 7-3 advantage, but it was already slipping back toward even footing. 5-5. He felt his brows twitch as he read the situation. He had struck first, seized control, yet still couldn't end it. Damn it. I can't push him any further. If not for his aura, at this rate, he'd be stuck in a war of attrition. His best bet now was to bait Elmont into a mistake or wait for one. However, Elmont was regaining his composure. Elmont parried Leon's attack with a loud thwack. Leon was pushed back, now down to 4-6. He took a step back, reassessing the situation. The conditions were against him in every way. He'd lost his stamina advantage, and he couldn't afford to block with his weapon directly. Keeping up using only his eyes was already absurd. Roderick's vision, the secret technique passed down by the holy sword El Cid, was that incredible. "You're persistent. Stop clinging and just fall already," Elmont shouted. Leon's eyes blazed at the arrogance. He snapped back. "That's what I should be saying to you." Lacking speed and strength, he would make up for it with Roderick's vision. If he could just read the next moment even faster, even clearer, he could turn this round. Sharper, wider, deeper. Elmont's movements began to slow, then slower still, like watching someone wade through water. Gotcha. Leon's eye evolved on the field and read him completely. He slipped past a gusting strike, dodged another, parried the third, and managed to retreat for paces. He had pulled himself back from the brink and leveled the field again. Realizing this, Elmont's face twisted. Even using aura, he couldn't break the deadlock in a duel against a commoner. Frustrated, he glanced toward Instructor Helmet and asked, "Sir, are you sure Leon can't use aura?" "He can't. I confirmed it myself just yesterday." After another complaint, "How is this possible?" Elmont let out a breath and adjusted his grip on the sword. He already lived in his older brother's shadow. Now some commoner was making him look pathetic. His eyes narrowed, burning with resentment. "I didn't think I'd be using this on a nobody like you," he muttered to himself as he shifted into an unusual stance. His lower body remained firm, but he twisted his upper body halfway around. It looked like something out of a mid-lower stance lance technique, not by someone wielding a sword. Leon's breath caught the moment he saw it. This had to be the secret sword technique. That must be it. The unnamed finisher he'd seen on Elmont's status screen, the one labeled secret sword technique. I was about to reveal its fangs. El Cid didn't say a word, which meant he wanted Leon to handle it himself. I don't even know what kind of attack it is. Leading with a strike is too risky. What's it going to be, a thrust? A slash? Or maybe he'll throw the sword? Leon's eyes blazed, veins rising in the whites. He was ready to catch even the smallest twitch. And then, Elmont's torso twisted like a vortex. It was fast. As he stepped forward, his torso snapped around with it. Leon shivered at the sheer speed but reacted immediately. The thrust came down like lightning aimed straight at his heart. But it was dodgeable. It was fast, yes, but not faster than Roderick's vision. Leon shifted to the side, but the wooden blade that was charging straight suddenly curved. Ah, this one was dangerous. Within that instant of accelerated awareness, Leon understood the nature of Elmont's secret technique. The initial thrust, powered by the torsion of the upper body, was bait. The real attack came from the sudden directional shift, driven by the lower body. It was a strike designed to catch evasive movements, a kill move meant to punish anyone who tried to dodge. This was Crescent Stab House Bourbon's secret technique. How do I stop this? Dodging was no longer an option. The blade's new path would slam directly into his ribs, even if he twisted away. It wouldn't pierce wooden sword or not, but broken ribs would be more than enough to end the fight. For the first time, Leon felt truly cornered, and cold sweat trickled down his back. No, it's too late. If he had moved with the intent to block from the start, maybe. But now, with his posture broken, this wasn't a technique he could withstand. If he didn't deflect it perfectly, the blow would shatter his wooden training sword and pierce his chest. Leon stared at the rapidly approaching blade and let out a disappointed sigh. He hadn't let his guard down. He hadn't been careless. Unfortunately for Leon, secret sword techniques were just that kind of move. If you didn't know about it in advance, you died. Their preliminary movements were vague at best and were sometimes even pure misdirection. There were few killing techniques as treacherous as this. Move! Leon yelled inwardly as his overclocked brain slowed Elmont's sword in his vision. Unfortunately, that slowdown applied to his body as well. Visual tracking and reflexes could improve reaction time, but they didn't actually increase his physical speed. In other words, it was a useless act of desperation. I said, move. Blood vessels burst in Leon's eyes as he pushed past his limit. His vision blurred from the pain, but the incoming blade became even slower. It was barely crawling now, less than a centimeter per second. Again, unfortunately, the same applied to Leon. He pushed off the ground with everything he had, but the sword was still faster than his dodge. At this rate, he wouldn't avoid it. At this rate, he'd be hit. At this rate, he'd lose. Move. Then, a sickening tearing sound rang out. It was like something intangible had ripped open, a sound with no clear source. At the same time, Leon's left thigh broke free, unbound in this slowed world. It was the only part of his body that moved at normal speed. The blade whistled past with a whip, narrowly missing. Had it landed clean, it would have splintered bone. Leon's insides froze from the sheer killing force he had just felt, but he quickly snapped back and closed in on Elmont. Big, lunging thrusts always came with risk, and with a longsword instead of a spear, that risk was even greater. A spear had range to recover, a sword didn't. You. Up close, Elmont looked stunned. His family's secret sword technique had failed. He was panicking from how close Leon had gotten, and he was desperate not to lose. The muddy pool of mixed emotions evident on Elmont's face was read by Leon, and it only solidified his resolve. There wasn't going to be another chance if he missed this one. Elmont swung his fist in desperation. But Leon's counter smashed the bones in his left wrist with a horrible sound. And what followed was the kind of pain that would make most people flinch whether they delivered or received it, but neither of them did. Leon's bloodshot eyes were icy cold while Elmont's burned with fury and humiliation. Being pushed to the brink by a commoner with no aura? To Elmont, it was simply unforgivable. Not that I care, Leon thought. He almost laughed at how pathetic it was. Elmont had been born with everything, and this was all he amounted to? Eyes stinging, Leon charged again. Their wooden swords clashed, shaving chunks off each other. Leon wielded his sword with both hands. Elmont, now limited to one, was clearly being overpowered. He was the one staggering with each exchange now. Leon drove him back step by step until he was right at the edge of the ring. One more step, and he would lose by ring out. Leon lifted his sword overhead and plainly said, "It's over. Don't be ridiculous." Elmont shouted and swung with all his strength, channeling every last bit of aura into one final all-out strike. After dozens of clashes, Leon's training sword had to be nearing its limit. However, unlike Leon, Elmont could reinforce his weapon with aura. If Elmont destroyed the sword, he might still turn the fight around with one hand. He had been waiting for this moment. That's why he'd let himself be driven to the edge, baiting Leon into delivering the finishing blow. "You've been dancing in the palm of my hand, commoner." And just as Elmont expected, Leon stepped forward for a final clash. Except instead of clashing, Leon slipped past his sword with a clean parry. Wah! Elmont stumbled. The impact of the parry wasn't even that hard, but having his strategy completely read and deflected shook him far more than any physical blow. It seemed that mental hit was strong enough to leave him standing frozen, dumbfounded in the face of defeat, while Leon showed no mercy. His sword smashed into Elmont's mouth and snapped in half on impact. White fragments flew with the shard's teeth. Elmont collapsed, finally unconscious, and so the string of duels that had begun as a commoner's rebellion came to an end. Even Instructor Helmet couldn't hide his surprise as he declared the result. "Leon is the winner." Only then did Leon lower the broken stump of his sword. It had been a narrow victory. He'd anticipated Elmont's attempt to break his weapon, but if he'd been even one beat slower, the outcome might have flipped. Honestly, avoiding the crescent stab at all had been practically a miracle. Leon wasn't sure he could pull it off a second time. "Well done, my pupil." That bastard got his teeth knocked out by the technique he mocked. Bet he'll think twice before running his mouth again. Doubt it. Leon just shrugged at El Cid's smug voice. Would getting hit once really change his character? If anything, a noble like that would just stew in resentment. People rarely changed, and there was a reason for the old saying that it's better to throw them out than fix them. Still, a sworn agreement was a sworn agreement. As long as Elmont kept his word, Leon would at least be left alone as long as he was in the academy. By the way, I'm surprised, Leon. You've already opened the gate to excel? That's much faster than I expected. Leon, realizing he was alone, responded aloud, "Excel?" Helmet had taken the unconscious Elmont to the infirmary, leaving Leon once again to clean up the aftermath. He had grown used to it after repeating the same routine for days. Gripping the now familiar broom, Leon asked, "Oh, you mean the thing that happened when I dodged Elmont's secret technique?" As El Cid replied, his voice sounded more animated than usual. "That's the one. The human body moves slower than the mind, especially when in a state of acceleration. Reflexes are just fast decision-making, not true speed. So why can seasoned swordsmen move faster than they should be able to? Because they've awakened their aura? Half right. Without aura, the body can't handle the recoil. That's why most people can't use Excel until they've learned aura first." Then, El Cid offered his praise. "But Leon, you used Excel without even touching aura. Sure, it was limited to your thigh and only a partial success, but that's still incredible. You broke past the body's natural limits on willpower alone." Leon thought for a second, then asked in an uneasy voice, "Huh? Wait a second. You said the body can't handle it without aura. So why am I okay? Is it because I only partially used it?" "Pretty much. The speed wasn't anything crazy, and you stopped before your muscles or tendons tore apart. But if you'd used it across your whole body, your insides would have flipped. That was really dangerous." Leon broke into a cold sweat. He hadn't even known what he was doing, and he'd nearly wrecked himself from the inside out. So this is what they meant when they said it's easy for the ignorant to be brave. Well, he wasn't exactly out of the woods yet. "Oop, is it coming now? You'd better take care of your body for a while." "What are you talking about? What's coming?" Leon looked around, bewildered. Helmet was gone. Elmont was gone. He just needed to head back to the dorms and rest, so why the sudden warning? He found out soon enough. What do you think? Muscle pain. As soon as Elsid said that, agony exploded in his left thigh. Ugh! Leon dropped to the ground, clutching his leg and rolling in pain. It was delayed onset muscle soreness at its worst. It felt like his thigh was being seared by fire or twisted by a metal rod. A moment later, the cramps hit and his whole body began to tremble. Even a lightning magic attack wouldn't hurt this much. Leon wept openly, something he hadn't done even with broken bones. Excel didn't just tear his muscle fibers, it rattled his nervous system. Helmet, having returned after dropping off Elmont at the infirmary, saw the poor Leon writhing in pain. What in the world? Leon, did you pick up an internal injury? Helmet had to make yet another trip to the infirmary to lay Leon on the bed right beside Elmont. One lay peacefully asleep, a little bruised but composed. The other was writhing in agony, thigh swollen like a melon. It looked more like the loser and winner had switched places. 3 days later, Leon stepped out of the infirmary and tested his left leg with a few stomps. Finally feeling a bit better. Fortunately, there wasn't much pain, but he wasn't ready to relax. Just the day before, a few steps had triggered another round of cramps. Elsid snickered and offered a warning. For using Excel, this isn't bad, but let's just seal it away until you learn Aura. You try that again and it will kill you. I figured. Leon gave a bitter smile as he rubbed his thigh. Even the strongest muscle in the human body, his well-trained thigh, had been shredded. Anyone else might have ended up crippled, whether he meant to or not. That had been incredibly dangerous. To help with recovery, he strolled out to a park on the academy's outskirts. The landscaping was nice thanks to the head gardener, and it was a favorite spot for students to gather. What's going on? As he sat on a bench to rest, he sensed murmuring around him. It wasn't idle chatting, but hushed whispering meant to avoid being overheard. Leon, now attuned to this sort of thing, subtly shifted his eyes. Some students were pretending not to look at him while stealing glances. A few of their lips moved just enough to pick up on. Looks like some rumors about me are going around. Oh, spread by the idiots? Leon nodded and sighed. They're probably trying to justify their losses, saying I was scouted by a noble house or secretly learned a secret sword technique. Where'd all that noble pride go? I wonder, if they had any pride, they wouldn't have come after me in the first place. Fair point. Elsid agreed, and Leon, tired of the whole mess, closed his eyes and shut out the noise. There was no value in chasing down every stupid rumor, even if their duels had been under confidentiality. Getting sent to the infirmary left a record. Leon figured word would get out eventually, but he hadn't expected it to happen this fast. Barely 3 days, and he was already in the spotlight. His remaining days at the academy, though likely short now, were about to get a lot more annoying. Just then, Leon felt a presence approaching directly, unhesitatingly. Who's that? Leon opened his eyes to see who it was, and sure enough, it was exactly who he expected. Chloe. She stood before him, smiling gently as always. Her hair shimmered gold in the sunlight behind her. Her lake-colored eyes sparkled with warmth. Chloe spoke. Hi, Leon. And somehow he didn't know why her voice calmed the ever-restless storm inside him. Mind if I sit here? Chloe asked. Do whatever you want, Leon replied. With Leon's permission, Chloe sat beside him. They were just about a hand's width apart, a distance that made them feel familiar yet strangely distant. He couldn't remember the last time they'd sat like this. What used to feel so natural no longer did, and that realization left a bitter taste in his mouth. Perhaps it was regret. The inferiority and jealousy that had once dominated him were long gone, leaving behind only faint embers. It was only now, sitting beside Chloe, that Leon realized that. So that's what it is, Leon thought as he finally understood his emotions for Chloe. It wasn't that he'd come to dislike her. His feelings had simply cooled. What remained was the affection of a friend who had shared many years with him. Only now could Leon finally say he was truly Chloe's friend. He spoke, a bit more gently than before. What's up, Chloe? You should be in your alchemy class, no? Don't tell me you skipped. Chloe blinked in surprise, but it probably wasn't just because of what he said. She must have sensed the shift in his tone, how different he sounded compared to before. She paused for a moment, then smiled like always. What? Are you stupid? If I skip even once, I lose my scholarship. You think I'd ditch just to see your face? Oh, then what are you doing here? The alchemy instructor is sick, so class was cancelled. And when I heard you were discharged, I thought I'd come find you. Looks like you're all healed, walking around without crutches." Leon nodded and replied, "Still, just in case, I'm gonna rest another 3 or 4 days. I'm ahead on the curriculum anyway, so it shouldn't hurt my grades." To that, Chloe said with a light HMPH, "You never listened when I told you to take it easy." Leon, looking at the pouting Chloe whose advice he had ignored for years, scratched his head sheepishly, leaving behind a curious silence. If there was one thing that had changed, it was the fact that this silence was warm, unlike before. Leon blinked slowly, letting himself rest in that feeling. So this is how I used to talk. He had forgotten. All that was left had been his stubborn refusal to give up cutting himself open and bleeding, cursing the world for not rewarding his blood, sweat, and tears. Was what he felt for Chloe really love? Or was it more of a jealousy for someone like Lion? Consumed by the pain of truly believing that he was nothing special, he had tried to find salvation in self-inflicted wounds. And then, it was a sword who heard his cries. "You're the one who called me, Leon." And that sword offered him a chance to defy an unfair fate. "Then I shall grant you the chance to prove it." The holy sword, El Cid, the sharp-tongued weapon housing the soul of a flawed hero, etched into the back of Leon's left hand as a sigil. Because of El Cid, Leon was pulled out from a bottomless pit and was able to take his first step in years. If a hero was one who saved the world, then it was El Cid who saved that hero. Leon felt a sudden surge of gratitude. I'll become a hero," he muttered inwardly. Anyone could say the words, but Leon meant it. He would become more than just worthy of El Cid. He would surpass every expectation. A hero worthy of the sword, no. One who would raise its name even higher. Leon's eyes briefly flashed gold. For the tiniest moment too fast for even Chloe to notice they burned as brightly as the sun. Wait, what? Why are you leveling up all of a sudden? Even El Cid, speaking in a way Leon couldn't hear, was flustered as he scrambled to figure it out. Born perfect. El Cid couldn't understand how simply stealing one's heart could push a human to take an immense step forward. Leon's will, which was already rock solid, had now reached near superhuman heights, though neither he nor Chloe noticed the change. Chloe just smiled playfully and said, "Oh, speaking of, have you heard the rumors going around about you? They're amazing. I just got out of the infirmary." "How would I have? Oh, is that why people have been buzzing around me?" "Probably." Leon gave a small nod, motioning with his chin for her to go on. They'd known each other long enough for her to know he didn't like dragging things out. Busted. Chloe gave a sheepish grin and said, "There's more than a few, so it'll take a minute." Leon's brows furrowed as she listed out the rumors one by one. He had expected some exaggerations, but this was beyond absurd. A wandering swordmaster taking him in as a disciple? Being secretly raised as a royal weapon by the crown? Some of it was so ridiculous it was borderline treasonous. Some rumors were just silly. Some made him marvel at human imagination, and some made him question the intelligence of the students spreading them. Actually, there was one that was surprisingly closer to the truth. "I picked up a cursed sword behind the mountain." "Huh? How the hell did they guess that?" "Hey, I said I'm not a cursed sword, you brat." Leon ignored the sword's protest and smirked. Despite all the rumors, no one had said a word about the holy sword. That alone proved how much power and weight the words holy sword carried. The scriptures said, "He who is chosen by the holy sword shall become the savior of the world." It was never something to joke about, and even the most immature students were careful with it. That was the weight Leon now carried. "But I can handle it." El Cid had chosen him, and that belief more than anything was proof. Leon no longer wavered, and answering someone's trust was one of the hero's virtues. Unknowingly, he had already taken his first step. Chloe, watching his expression, smiled and commented, "You really have changed. Huh, you've got a better look now. Not anxious or restless, just calm. Like you're looking far ahead. Kinda like Lion, but not the same. Maybe it's the difference between someone who looks up and someone who looks forward." She murmured something about how it was a bit of a shame as she stood up. Seemed like her next class was about to start. For someone who had never missed out on a scholarship, skipping class was unthinkable. She turned to him once more as if there was something left to say. "Leon," she called, and their eyes met. One pair was a warm brown, while the other was a cool blue, not alike in the slightest. Chloe opened her mouth as if to say something, then stopped. Instead, she said something that didn't feel that important at all. "Even just once in a while is fine. Would you talk to Lion?" It didn't seem like there's anyone else in that class he really gets along with. Leon nodded casually, like it wasn't a big deal, and said, "I'll try. Thanks. See you next time." One stayed behind, the other walked away. Leon watched Chloe's figure as she faded into the distance and muttered the words he'd held back until now. I can't do anything about something that was never possible to begin with. He felt bad, but he couldn't grant that request. After the final duel, he intended to leave Lion and the academy behind. They might meet again someday, but by then, Lion would surely have made a friend or two of his own. With that thought, Leon stood up. This was supposed to be an outing for his rehab program for his injury, anyway. If he wanted to face Lion as soon as possible, he needed to get his left thigh back to full strength. Soon, Lion, no longer weighed down by inferiority, Leon's eyes now burned with a competitive spirit. With a healthy resolve in his step, he clenched his fists and looked ahead to the battle to come. Their names matched, their birthdays matched, and now even fate had chosen to cross their paths. The day of their first true showdown was drawing near. The wooden sword failed to withstand the strain of sudden acceleration and split with a sharp crack as it cut through empty air. However, neither Leon nor El Cid looked surprised. They'd expected this outcome. It was a deliberate test of a new technique. So even a fresh wooden sword can't handle one full strike, huh? No matter the mastery, this move puts too much strain on the weapon. And since practice swords are usually weaker than real ones, we'll have to be careful. One clean hit is all I need, Leon said firmly, massaging his stiff wrist. A trump card was meant to be shown only once, especially against a genius like Lion. Using the same move multiple times would only invite a counterattack. To win this time, he would need more than raw skill. He would have to read his opponent's very thoughts. The stat window of Lion he had seen a few days ago still haunted him. Name, Lion. Title and class, swordsman with nothing but talent and bloodline. Level, 25. Strength, 140D. Endurance, 122D. Agility, 141D. Aura, 253C. Skills, Sword Mastery I Max, Sword Mastery 2. Secret Sword Technique, Blink Step, Aura Wielder 2. Innate Martial Root. Leon couldn't make sense of half of what was listed, but El Cid's explanation was enough to make him flinch. Sword Mastery 2 was swordsmanship based on aura manipulation. Blink Step was a special movement technique that produced a burst of speed similar to Excel. As for Innate Martial Root, there wasn't much to explain. Unlike Leon, whose body had to be modified by El Cid, Lion had simply been born with a martial artist's body. That alone was impressive, but Aura Wielder 2 was on another level entirely. You're telling me Lion can use sword aura? Leon asked in shock. Yeah, though at level 1 it's probably just a faint mist, but he's still reached the level where aura can manifest beyond the body. That's already stronger than most instructors. Leon wasn't wrong. Aside from veterans like Instructor Helmet, most academy staff were roughly on par with senior knights. Taking his secret sword technique and Blink Step into account, most instructors wouldn't be able to guarantee victory against Lion in a one-on-one match. It was simply absurd. While most talented knights only reached this stage in their 30s, Lion hadn't even come of age yet. Leon would be facing him with aura locked away, so it wouldn't be quite that one-sided. But even Lion's base stats and Blink Step alone were a staggering gap. I'm weaker in strength and speed, but my endurance is slightly higher, and that Blink Step being a physical technique, I bet it's like Excel and takes a toll on the body, right? Of course. The trade-off is endurance. The body moves fast, but your breath can't keep up. You tire out quick. Oh ho, it was useful advice. With that, Leon started forming his strategy for the duel. Lion would be a formidable opponent, but not an unbeatable one. Compared to Elmont using aura, Lion would only be slightly stronger. Granted, if Lion did use aura, the fight wouldn't even be fair to begin with. That thought gave Leon pause. He decided to ask El Cid a question, not out of fear, but from genuine curiosity. El Cid, hypothetically, really hypothetically, if I lose to Lion, what then? El Cid didn't answer right away. Leon, of course, asked because of the possibility of him becoming Lion's retainer after the match. Could the hero meant to save the world truly serve under someone else? Only the Holy Sword El Cid could answer that question. But the answer he gave was unexpected. I won't tell you. Why not? For once, El Cid sounded serious. He added, this is a test. I told you from the start, your trials will be greater than the opportunities. Bit harsh for a first test. This duel could be a turning point in your destiny. If you defeat Lion, I'll explain everything. And when I do, you'll understand. Leon took his words to heart. El Cid had teased him, tormented him, but never once lied when it mattered. There must be a reason why Leon couldn't know yet. Something that would shake his resolve if he did. So Leon said no more and raised a fresh training sword. He still had too many weaknesses to face Lion. The dull thud of splintering would rang out, again and again, long into the night. The rainy sky, shrouded in storm clouds, was a dull, lifeless gray that seemed to cast gloom even on those looking up from beneath it. The downpour was so heavy that one couldn't see even a step ahead. That made it all the more oppressive. Lion, who had been staring out the window, found himself feeling much the same. The unwavering storm slammed against the glass more like a typhoon than mere rain. The noise it made was like an unwelcome guest knocking at the door. Though he knew no one would be visiting, Lion kept glancing toward the entrance regardless. Today's weather was just that miserable. Lion set down his now cold coffee and turned toward the sound of approaching footsteps. "Is he back?" he muttered. In a mansion that housed only a handful of people, there was only one person who would bother making their presence known. As expected, the one to open the door was Gilbert. "I've returned, Your Highness. Come in." He had served Lion faithfully ever since their days in the Clyde Empire, once holding the rank of vice captain of the Imperial Guard. The number of times his strength had helped them escape a crisis was beyond counting. The aged knight entered with his usual poise. He had clearly taken the time to freshen up before knocking on Lion's door despite the storm. His shoes and coat looked spotless, as though brand new. "Did you look into the rumors?" Lion asked. With no one else around, Gilbert shed the formalities of a butler and answered as a knight would, kneeling on one knee before his liege. "Yes, Your Highness." Though far past his prime, the man who had once commanded the Emperor's Guard found infiltrating a small kingdom's academy a trivial task. Even Helmet, the strongest at the academy, was little more than a whelp in comparison. It's confirmed that Leon put those rabble-rousers in their place. Some of them are still making excuses, but none of them have tried to challenge him again. I believe that says enough about the gap in ability. Even those prideful fools had to accept defeat, huh? Precisely, Your Highness. It meant Leon had beaten them so thoroughly that they couldn't even think of retaliating. Not just their bodies, but their spirits had been crushed. A smile tugged at Lion's lips. So his judgment had been right after all. Who else but Leon could put noble brats in their place without even using aura? And Elmont too? Yes, that's impressive. Far more than I expected. Gilbert nodded in agreement. It wasn't something a fellow noble could say proudly. But most of the nobles who entered the academy weren't exactly top tier. Any heir with true potential would be privately trained within the family. For nobles, raising a successor was a sacred duty. They would go to great lengths to bring in exceptional instructors, and pour all the house's resources into nurturing them. In fact, if even a single swordmaster emerged from a remote barony, that family could rise above counts. Sending such a successor to an academy was unthinkable. In other words, attending an academy usually meant the child wasn't worth investing the family's time and resources in. But there are always exceptions, like a direct heir of a count, per se. Count was the threshold of high nobility. A legitimate heir from such a line couldn't be taken lightly. Even if not the chosen heir, they would still be raised as a spare. He would have learned at least some secret sword techniques. Elmont Bourbon wasn't someone you could lump in with the rest. And yet, Leon had defeated him in a fair duel. "One last thing, Your Highness." "HM, there's more?" Gilbert responded quietly to Lion's puzzled tone. "A message from Leon. He says his preparations are complete." Lion's eyes widened for a moment, then settled back into their usual calm. Even if not as much as Leon, the same melancholic hit him as well. It was time to sever the bond that they had formed over the last 3 years, and forge a brand new one. Finally. "It took longer than I expected," Lion muttered. "If the time was spent on someone worthy, I wouldn't call 3 years long," Gilbert replied. Lion smiled at the remark. "Oh, so, Sir Gilbert, you acknowledge him now. If I recall, you were still on the fence about him the last time I asked." "He has proven himself beyond my judgment," Gilbert admitted without hesitation. "To defeat the son of a count without aura, that's more than enough proof of his potential." Age and experience didn't show through pride, but through the depth of one's life. Without shame or stubbornness, Gilbert accepted Leon's growth, and that open-mindedness was what made Gilbert special. There had been stronger knights, to be sure, But it was that pragmatism that earned him the title of vice captain. He was always the first to accept reality and strategize accordingly. Then, Lion turned to the window and spoke again. Sir Gilbert, please inform Leon that I will be inviting a spectator. A spectator, Your Highness? Gilbert tilted his head. As the official overseer of the duel, no additional spectator should have been necessary. However, before he could ask further, he realized and stammered, Why, Your Highness? Don't tell me. I know it's cruel. Lion's voice was cold and level, an implicit command not to object. But it has to be done. If he doesn't sever that attachment completely, it'll linger even after he becomes my knight. You were worried about that too, weren't you? Your wish is my command. You're dismissed. As Gilbert quietly left, Lion turned back to the storm raging outside the window. The scene felt like it mirrored the turmoil in his heart. It couldn't be helped, or so he tried to believe, but no matter how he justified it, the image of Leon's twisted expression weighed on him. This wasn't the way he had wanted to bring both Chloe and Leon to his side. No matter how he tried to reason it out, no answer came. Born a prince of the Clyde Empire, never having known a true friend, Lion was simply not equipped to solve this problem. Finally, it was the day of the duel. Stepping out of the dormitory, Leon looked up at the distant sky. The black storm clouds that had rolled in over the past few days now blanketed the sky entirely, growling like they might hurl down a waterfall of rain any minute. It was a sky as savage as a beast straining against its leash. Anyone could see this was no ordinary weather. Even though it was a much-anticipated day off, the students, except for Leon, had all shut themselves indoors. Feels like someone in the heavens is setting the stage for us. At Leon's absent-minded remark, El Cid answered, Maybe they really are. A duel where the Holy Sword's chosen stakes his future makes sense. The skies would stir a little. Don't you think? Wait, really? El Cid chuckled in his usual teasing tone. Of course not. If the heavens reacted every time a hero did something, the continent would have been wiped out when I was still alive. Though, to be fair, there were a few lightning strikes whenever the goddess threw a tantrum. The goddess of mercy? Just remember, every god has two faces. Leon, trying to figure out the opposite of mercy, broke out in a cold sweat. Surely he wouldn't get struck by lightning just for losing this match. Now he had one more reason not to lose. As he walked down the empty hallway, Leon spoke again, not to himself this time, but to El Cid. By the way, who's the spectator? The overseer is that old man, right? El Cid replied as though the answer was obvious. Huh? You still haven't figured it out? It's probably Chloe. Chloe. Why her? All right. I suppose there's a bit of a discrepancy in perspectives here. El Cid muttered and then offered a short explanation for Leon's benefit. Lion still thinks you have feelings for her, so he's trying to use this duel to sever that possibility once and for all. You see it all the time, kings and vassals fighting over the same woman. I see. It made perfect sense. True to form, Lion was preemptively eliminating anything that might hinder a ruler-subordinate relationship. Of course, in his plan, he spared no consideration for either Chloe or Leon. This was nothing more than a calculated move to unilaterally sever their ties. Leon let out a bitter laugh. He had known it in his head, but only now did he feel how deeply noble Lion really was. I've always hated this side of him, the noble art of politics, of controlling people's emotions and relationships as though they were pieces on a board, of never treating others as equals. Leon clenched both fists tightly. You mad? He pushed open the door to the annex. His steps were a bit heavier now. Leon didn't try to suppress the anger surging within him. Whatever else, this crossed a line. If Lion truly cared about Chloe, he shouldn't be manipulating them like this. Emotions left to rot always became wounds that fester. I'm gonna make that smug bastard regret this, Leon muttered under his breath. With only one door left before the match, Leon paused to steady his breath. His heart was burning, but his mind had to stay cool. Lion wasn't someone who could be beaten by raw emotion. As his will settled his body and mind alike, Leon's eyes shimmered faintly gold. The door finally opened with a creak, and their gazes met. You're late, Lion greeted. You're just early, Leon responded. Leon shrugged and walked up to Lion. There wasn't much more to say at this point. The two entered the ring and began warming up, almost in sync. Leon was the one to break the silence. Where's the spectator? Thought you were bringing someone. They're somewhere we can't see them. Wouldn't want either of us making a mistake because we're distracted, especially one we could use as an excuse later. Fair enough. Clearly, Lion had no intention of revealing Chloe. Maybe it was to avoid Leon losing focus. Or maybe it was in case she and Leon reacted badly to the situation. Coincidentally, the two finished warming up at the same time. Seeing this, Gilbert approached and presented to Swords. "Leon, please choose the weapon you prefer." "Oh, all right." Caught off guard by the unexpected formal tone, Leon paused but accepted a sword without showing it. Since Lion hadn't revealed his identity, Gilbert seemed intent on staying in his role as a servant. Lion took the remaining sword. It rang clear and sharp when tapped. It was clear that this wasn't one of the worn-out practice blades lying around the training grounds. Though blunted, the blade was dense enough not to bend even if smashed against stone. Without using aura, not even Lion could break it easily. As Leon examined the sword, Lion pulled something from his pocket and swallowed it. "What was that? What did you just take?" Leon asked. "Oh, it's an aura-suppressing pill. I said I wouldn't use it, but sometimes it leaks out on reflex. If that happened, this wouldn't be a duel, it'd be a disaster," Lion explained. "Yikes." Leon imagined himself getting chopped in half and flinched. Lion chuckled, then lowered his sword as the pill took effect. There wasn't even a hint of playfulness in him now. He was just as serious about this as Leon was. "Shall we begin?" Lion suggested. "Let's." Leon raised his sword and took a diagonal stance. Lion's brow twitched slightly. His innate talent could sense the danger in the opponent before him. Not once in the past 3 years had he felt this way. Tension thickened between them. Leon, with focus greater than ever, and Lion, setting aside all composure and approaching with sincerity, reading the moment's intensity. Gilbert cut in swiftly. "Then, begin." The reply from Leon and Lion wasn't in words, but steel. Iron clashed with iron in a shrieking scream. Sparks flew as their swords met, and Leon's and Lion's eyes locked, flashing. This was the beginning, and this would be the end. Their opposing convictions exploded through their swords. At the very first clash, Leon was the one who was pushed back. His strike had been perfect, half a beat faster than Lion's, and he had even gained the briefest edge. But he had still been thoroughly overpowered. Even without aura, the difference in their raw strength was clear. Leon took a step back and immediately thrust forward. His blade pierced the air in a minimal movement using only his wrist and elbow, and the sharp pressure halted Lion's attempt to chase him down. A step behind. Still, not a bad start, Leon thought as he squared up again, reassessing as he faced Lion. He had known their power gap, but the stats window hadn't conveyed just how wide it was. He understood now, after crossing blades, that if they continued trading blows directly, he wouldn't even last 30 seconds. With a short breath, he released the tension in his body. His sword drooped diagonally only to whip upward like a snake and slash down. The strike was loose in form, but razor-sharp in precision. The motion was fluid, almost sluggish, but the tip gleamed with menace like a viper striking. Lion coolly blocked it with his crossguard. Had he misjudged even slightly, his wrist would have shattered. Instead, with the smallest movement, he earned maximum gain in defense. Lion's block was straight out of the textbook, and from that guard, he flowed straight into riposte. A diagonal slash for a cleaving blow meant to shatter Leon's collarbone. The speed of his transition alone was absurd. It was a technique that followed up an ideal defense by exploiting the opponent's unstable footing, or psychological opening. Leon deflected Lion's riposte sideways and took a half step back. Though he had redirected the force cleanly, his wrist still tingled. It wasn't a serious shock, a few seconds of rest, and he would be fine. Of course, Lion wouldn't let that opening go wasted. Here it comes. A faint echo rushed toward Leon's vision. It was the hazy forewarning granted by Roderick's vision, an image that arrived half a beat ahead of the actual movement. Leon's eyes widened, tracking the blur. He couldn't afford to blink even once. That would be the end of it all. He's on a different level than Elmont. This vision was a prediction, not foresight. The faster and more refined the enemy's movements, the less precise the image. Lion's pre-attack silhouette was fainter and less complete than anyone's, which meant Leon had to fill in the gaps with his own instincts and skill. Blow after blow, clash after clash, the two exchanged attacks relentlessly. This couldn't be called a cadet duel, even without aura. The sheer depth of their swordsmanship and combat sense outclassed most officially appointed knights. Their fundamental swordsmanship was evenly matched. Lion was faster and stronger, yes, but Leon's eyes let him see half a beat ahead, allowing him to hold his own. He couldn't perform perfect parries or counters like he had done against Elmont, but he was always a step ahead in their mental exchange. which was just enough to let him keep pace. He's strong. A real monster. Leon, when did you get so strong? Both were shocked, Leon by Lion's boundless strength, and Lion by the fact that even at full force, he couldn't overwhelm Leon. It was enough to ignite the flame of resolve in both of their eyes. Incredible, Gilbert muttered in awe. He had known of his liege's genius, but he hadn't expected Leon to keep up like this. Even a battle-hardened knight of decades was stirred. Their next flurry was even more vicious. With a brief cry, Lion attempted a double feint move. Leon saw through it and responded with a time thrust. A pinpoint stab meant to puncture the moment between complex fakes. Lion dodged that with half a step and slashed at Leon's exposed lower half. Leon retreated just enough to counter, aiming at Lion's head, but managed only to shear a few strands of his golden hair. Their blades, sometimes held with both hands and sometimes with just one, clashed in a ferocious storm. No solid hits had landed yet, but the ferocity only escalated faster, harder. Whoever backed down first would take on a massive disadvantage. Both men exhaled at the same time, staring each other down with contrasting expressions. And surprisingly, it was Lion whose face had hardened. It was a minuscule difference, but he had run out of breath first. If the exchanges continued at this rate, the gap would only widen, and Leon would inevitably gain the upper hand. Leon had spent years in grueling training, in endurance and grit. Even Lion couldn't compete. I can't let this drag on. Lion reevaluated his strategy with a clear mind. He had intended to dominate with swordsmanship alone, but that plan had already crumbled. They had exchanged nearly 100 blows, and they were still even. No, if only in terms of technique. Leon might even be ahead. To think that despite Lion's superior strength and speed, he had only managed an even match. If their physical abilities were equal, he would have already lost. Only then did Lion realize Leon's plan. So that's why you haven't gone for a serious yet, Leon. You've been aiming to grind me down from the beginning. It was a strategy without glamour. Stay close to your opponent. Don't give them a chance to catch a breath, and wear them down. Whittle away their advantage piece by piece. A war of attrition where a single mistake could end it all. Even the idea of it reeked of sweat. Lion found the tenacity distasteful, and yet, for some reason, he was enjoying himself. Leon truly intended to win, even if it meant fighting ugly. And even if it meant looking pathetic. His desperation and determination came through loud and clear. Yes, he had to break that will. If he couldn't, Leon would never surrender. Lion abruptly retreated and knocked Leon's sword away. Their blades had been clashing non-stop, but this gave them a brief moment to cool down. The distance between them widened to 4 paces again. Just as Leon had planned, it was a stalemate. However, Lion had the power to break that equilibrium with a secret technique of the Imperial martial arts. It interfered with muscles and blood flow to push the body beyond its limits. It was only half as effective without aura, but even that was plenty. Lion's entire body gave off an eerie, creaking sound as his muscles contracted. Leon couldn't hear it, but Lion could. His muscle fibers tightened and blood circulated faster. Not just in his arms and legs, even his deep core muscles engaged. It was the essence of a fortified body technique like blink step. It even drew energy meant for basic bodily functions and redirecting it for combat. Though Leon couldn't hear the change, he could sense it. And when he did, his spine froze. Time, already slowed to a crawl, decelerated further. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning his vision red. Only by pushing himself that far could he even react. But that instinct to push himself saved him 1 second later. Blood spattered from his right shoulder after being struck by a horizontal thrust. At impossible speed. There hadn't even been a visible wind up. So that's blink step, Leon thought, amazed. The blade didn't come at a deceiving, twisted trajectory like Elmont's. Lion had overwhelmed him on pure speed alone. This made him doubt whether Lion was truly suppressing his aura. But a voice answered his question. He's not using his aura. Not even a little. Seriously, the human body's stronger and faster than you think. There are techniques like blink step for speed and others for strength or durability. Don't measure everything by your own limits. That was all Elsid said. Their conversation ended, and right then, Lion made his move. A thunderous downward slash crashed toward Leon's crown. Leon barely blocked it, but his knees screamed in pain. Speed was power. His average speed was about a time and a half faster, and his burst speed was double the usual speed. Naturally, Lion's strikes with blink step were nearly twice as destructive as before. Blocking everything like before was impossible. Leon's upper body was already soaked in blood. He could only afford to protect his lower half to maintain his mobility. Thank the goddess they were using blunt blades. If these were real swords, he'd be full of deep, fatal wounds. Each impact sent Leon staggering. There was no room for counters when even trying to strike back would spell instant defeat. However, he couldn't just keep retreating, either, especially when there were only 5 or 6 steps remaining before he would be out of bounds. For an automatic forfeit, he had to find a way to push forward. It's impossible, Leon thought, trying to rack his brain to find an opening. There was none. Even dedicating everything to defense, he would last maybe 20 more exchanges. There was no room to think about advancing. This outcome had been set the moment Lion activated Blink Step. Leon's only option was to hold out and use what little edge he had in endurance, waiting until Blink Step drained Lion completely. Unfortunately, that wait was dragging on too long. Should I use Excel? Leon hesitated. He had pulled it off once. El Cid had warned against it, but that was for safety. If he concentrated it in a single limb like before and minimized the damage. Who am I kidding? What a joke. Leon laughed at himself. He'd used it once and couldn't walk for days. What made him think he could control it precisely now? Unless there were no other options, it was foolish to rely on such a gamble. He had to trust the strength he'd built up with his own hands. His breath wasn't ragged yet. His grip on the sword was still steady. He had overcome pain and fatigue like this countless times before. Let's keep going then, Leon muttered to himself and proceeded to deflect all 3 invisible slashes that came at him. One did scrape his skin, but it only drew a few drops of blood. At this point, that was a win. Leon's focus had reached a transcendental level. No distractions, just pure execution. If Lion's sword was a storm, Leon's was a mountain. It could be chipped away but never toppled. Only the screaming of steel filled the air as one monstrous strike took place after another. Speed, power, and technique merged. It broke through Leon's trance. He was blown back, tumbling for full steps before he caught himself, barely avoiding a ring out. Snapping back to attention, Leon raised his sword, and that was when he saw it. Lion wasn't charging in. He hadn't come to finish him off. His shoulders heaved, sweat poured like rain, and steam visibly rose from his clothes. This was his one and only chance. With no hesitation, Leon lunged forward. He was also at his limit. This attack would be the last. Liun! Leon shouted with everything he had as he sprinted across the 4-step gap in a flash. His roar split the air, and as if responding, thunder boomed outside. Then 1 step more. Their final blows crossed. I'll end it here, Leon declared, being the first to go on the offensive. Using the momentum of his all-out charge, he spun his entire body like a top and swung down. This was one of the strongest, most powerful final strikes despite being part of the fundamental techniques. Some schools praised this clean vertical as the slash of wrath. Even a novice could instinctively pull it off, and its raw power and speed were among the strongest there were. And Leon was no novice. With momentum behind him, this strike would shatter any sloppy defense blade and all. However, Lion scoffed. With a pale face, sweat-soaked body, and bloodless lips, he still managed to smile. It wasn't bravado. It was a certainty. I've won, Lion thought. He had known, somehow, deep down, that even with Blink Step, defeating Leon wouldn't be easy. Leon would endure to the end and find a chance to counter. If he wanted to completely crush Leon, he would need a strike greater than anything he'd done, or something that could even overcome Leon's final counter. It was already too late for the former. His secret technique came with tremendous recoil, and in his exhausted state without aura, he couldn't use it. So, he had been gradually preparing for this moment Leon's counter throughout the course of their duel. Blink Step had already exceeded its limits. His overworked blood vessels began to rupture, and his muscles tore strand by strand, swallowing him in waves of pain. His body expelled the rapidly burned energy in the form of heat and steam from his pores. He had hit a literal limit. What lay beyond was the realm of the impossible. To step past it was to risk total collapse. Lion crossed it without hesitation, thinking, if I'm truly a hero, then this much. He should be able to overcome it again and again. The weight of his duty on his back and the talent running through his blood exploded against his first real equal. Until now, there had never been a reason to push past his limit. He had never wanted to win this badly. That feeling, that will, pulled his body through the brink. He bent backward with limit-breaking Blink Step. Leon's blade narrowly missed and sliced the air, leaving himself completely open. When a finishing move failed, it turned on its user. Lion's blade shot forward like a flash, aiming for that instant of vulnerability. It was his finishing blow. Then, a sharp clang rang out as shards of a blade scattered. After more than 100 clashes, one of the blades, its durability at its end, had snapped under the final strike. But only one of them, the one that remained, was aimed at the other's throat. In that moment, the winner and loser were clearly decided. Why? Lion muttered as he stared blankly at the blade tip. In contrast, Leon's gaze was sharp and resolute. I win, Lion, he said. It was simple. Just as Lion had believed in himself, Leon had also believed in Lion. He figured Lion would have one last card to play, that he'd strike back at the very end. So Leon had prepared his own. El Cid commented, "Looks like all that training until your palms bled paid off, huh?" Leon glanced down at his palm, nodded, and thought, yeah. It was a technique he had practiced over and over for the past few days. A variation inspired by Elmont's crescent stab, one that disrupted timing between upper and lower body movements. Leon had used it to counter Lion's final move perfectly, though he hadn't expected Lion's blade to break so cleanly. Now that I think about it, this ended just like last time, Leon thought. Only the roles had reversed. A sword was broken, and victory came with a blade to the neck. Leon couldn't help but feel a strange sense of reflection. Gilbert stepped into the ring to announce the outcome. Victory goes to Leon. It was the end of a rivalry that had lasted for years. After countless defeats, loss after loss, Leon had finally won. I lost, huh? Lion dropped his head, his expression unreadable. It was the first time. The first time he had lost to someone his own age. The first time he had truly wanted to win. And the first time that desire had been crushed. Blaming the fact that he hadn't used aura would be a meaningless excuse. This was a duel he had accepted and fought wholeheartedly. The result said everything, and the sting of defeat, one he'd never felt before, sank into his voice. What would you like, Leon? Lion asked. Leon gave a dry smile at the uncharacteristic tone and replied, I don't know. He knew exactly why Lion sounded that way. Losing was painful even for ordinary people, how much more for a genius like Lion. And to lose to someone he'd never once lost to before, someone without even using aura, it was a bitter pill to swallow. Anyone would feel broken once in their life. It was just that Lion had been so exceptional that his first real defeat had simply come late. The disappointment he felt now must have been overwhelming. El Cid chimed in, still, once he overcomes it, he'll be even stronger. Damn these nasty geniuses, Leon thought. El Cid was right. Just as the earth hardened after the rain, failure was often a necessary growing pain for geniuses. Leon could fail 100 times and still stay in the same place. But Lion wouldn't. If he could turn this loss into nourishment, he would be a completely different opponent in just a few days. Leon added, I'll save it for later. Sorry, I don't have anything I want right now. If I think of something, I'll let you know then. That all right with you? Lion hesitated at the unexpected answer, but Leon just took that as consent and turned to go. Leaving Gilbert and Lion behind, he quickly walked out. But the moment he stepped outside the annex, his pace slowed, and soon he staggered to the wall, leaning heavily against it. Ugh, maybe I should have just collapsed there. It was pride. He didn't want to show weakness in front of Lion. Unlike Lion, who was only exhausted, Leon's body was a complete wreck. There were no deep wounds, but so many minor injuries had piled up that he'd lost a lot of blood. If he let go of the tension of battle right now, he would surely collapse and pass out on the spot. Then, a voice came, light of healing. Grant rest to the wounded. A gentle glow surrounded Leon. Shallow cuts closed, and the bleeding stopped. A faint vitality returned to his body, and the fog in his vision began to clear. Realizing that it was a 4th-tier healing spell, Leon turned around, already knowing who it was. Of course, it's you, Chloe, he said. Ida, Chloe. The spectator smiled softly as she kept casting. Her healing magic wasn't as efficient as divine techniques focused solely on restoration or blessing, but for injuries like these, it was more than enough. In just under a minute, she had closed most of his wounds. Looking at you, I can't even tell who won. You used to just scratch your hands a little, but look at you now. You're practically a pulp. Hey, I wouldn't have won if I hadn't gone this far. So what if you'd lost some duel? You and Lion, I just don't get you two. She muttered under her breath as she laid her hand on his last wound, his right shoulder, where Lion's thrust had grazed him. The torn flesh whereupon back together, and a sharp sting ran through him like static. You've gotten really strong, Leon. Leon said nothing, unable to think of a reply. But Chloe didn't wait for one. It was as if she had read his heart. "You're leaving the academy, aren't you?" she asked. Startled, Leon looked back at her and asked, "How did you know?" "You think I don't know you? Seriously, you idiot. I figured you'd try to stop me. As if that'd change your mind. You're just saying that." She wasn't wrong. When Leon scratched his head awkwardly and looked away, Chloe gave a small laugh and continued, "You've always been like this, taking on stuff everyone else says you can't do. And in the end, you always pull it off. Took a while this time, though. I thought I was pretty quick, considering the difficulty this time. You were late. Really late," she said and gave him a playful smack on the back. Leon staggered for a second, then started laughing for a reason even he didn't quite understand. Chloe chuckled too, as if it were contagious. It felt like they were kids again. "That's so," Leon said. "Ida? Really late? Ida?" And so the two of them kept exchanging words, like exchanging letters buried under 3 years of dust. They shared a conversation only the two of them could understand. Leon said without hesitation, "I'm all good here. Go give Lion a smack on the head for me." "I thought you were going to do it. Beat him up in front of his girlfriend? That would be kind of sad." "What? Ha ha ha." Chloe burst into laughter, wiping tears from her eyes. Who would have thought Leon of all people would crack a joke like that? Maybe it was because he finally felt lighter after beating Lion. Whatever the reason, she was glad to see it. "Well then, I'll be off," Leon said. The rain had stopped at some point. Stars glittered across the night sky, pouring through the cracks between the clouds. Leon looked up at the view as he said his goodbye. Chloe, watching his retreating back, called out to him, "Leon, what do you plan to do after leaving the academy?" "That's a secret. For now." He didn't turn around, only raised a hand over his shoulder. He couldn't tell even her. Not yet. If he said it now, it would only sound like a joke. After all, there was only one thing a hero was meant to do, just as Holy King Roderick, and every hero before him, had done. "I'm going to save the world." As if in response, the mark on the back of his left hand shimmered. This was only the beginning. Chloe remained there until Leon disappeared from sight. The fingers that had touched him still burned. Blood. His blood had soaked her nails from one of his wounds. Even after wiping it off with a handkerchief, the warmth lingered. He was like an unquenchable fire, a man who had finally claimed victory. After years of relentless effort, she had always been drawn to that fire since they were kids. Studying despite the boredom, enrolling in the academy, everything had been her way of chasing after him. I knew it all along. When had it started? When had the heat in his gaze begun to fluster her? When had it become so hard to meet his eyes? She hadn't understood it at first. They'd been close for so long, change felt frightening. Maybe his affection overwhelmed her. Leon had always been like fire. Once he made up his mind, he would push forward without ever giving up. Maybe she had sensed a difference in the depth of feeling. She didn't think she could match how deeply he cared. So, she chose someone else. Someone easier. Someone she could be with comfortably. "Leon, I won't regret my choice." Clasping both hands together, Chloe looked up into the night sky and into a universe that stretched before her, too vast for anyone to comprehend, a darkness filled with starlight. Image did not worship gods, but she also did not deny their existence either, and sometimes she sent up prayers even magic couldn't reach. "Goddess, please, if one day Leon becomes the most remarkable man of all, and makes her regret the choice she made that day, let someone truly worthy stand by his side. Let him find joy so much greater than the pain she gave him." With all her heart, Chloe wished for his future.